Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Break the Rules. I'm your host, Polyakov, and with me is Dr. Jason Reza Jorjani, one of the most important people, I think, of our time right now, as far as the books that you have written, your philosophy, and you being an Iranian patriot right now in this incredibly difficult time. So I am really, really thankful for you being able to join me today to talk about what's been happening with Iran and what the future looks like and what the main players are. And for everybody who's watching, I really appreciate it. And if you want to help grow this channel, make sure to like, subscribe, click the bell. All of that is very important for the growth of this channel. And yeah, I wanted to start out, Jason, to mention that today is also the death of Joseph Stalin, which on one hand is not exactly related to Iran, but on
It's
the other hand,
related, all right. It's
yes,
absolutely related. First of all, thank you,
yes,
and Lev. It's always great to be with you. You are, quite frankly, as my dear friend, the only person who I'm willing to talk to right now in the state of mind that I find myself in. Watching this situation unfold. But yeah, Joseph Stalin is absolutely relevant. And we'll come back around to this after some time. But viewers should know that the project of Kurdish separatism and of creating a Kurdistan nation state was engineered by the Soviet Union, in particular under the leadership of Joseph Stalin. And in 1946, during the Soviet occupation of northern Iran, a group of Kurdish separatists set up a so-called Republic of Mahabad, which was essentially an attempt to carve out a piece of Iran as an SSR, a Soviet Socialist Republic. So Stalin, for many reasons, is relevant, to the tragic history of Iran in the 20th and now 21st centuries, and that's one of them. But anyway, we can go back to your show intro.
yeah. Well, I mean, other than talking about this being the death of Stalin Day, which is a good day in that sense, in the other sense, it's a very frustrating day because of the fog of war of what's going on. But I think that it's best right now that we go to the very beginning of what exactly this revolution of the Lion and the Sun was, how it transpired, and yeah, let's just start from there.
So the last conversation that we had together was in New York in person, and we were speaking about a week into what has since been dubbed the Iranian National Revolution, or the National Revolution of the Lion and Sun, Enqilab Milli Iran, or Enqilab Milli Shir o Khorshid. And at the time that we spoke, I had already provided a brief recap of the situation to date, which we'll run through, really briefly, before focusing on the horrifically tragic ending of the first phase of the National Revolution of the Lion and Sun. So as I, explained in our last conversation, these protests began in late December with a general strike, which is a very serious matter. Iran's economy was already collapsing under the mismanagement of these mullahs, and it led eventually to a general strike, especially called by the bazaris, or the traditional merchant class of Iran, and they basically shut down all the main bazaars of Iran and held protests in them. And in very short order, that sparked a wider popular uprising. Now, here is what's of critical significance. We've seen many mass popular uprisings against the Islamic Republic in the past. 2009 to 2010, 2017 into 2018 was a particularly ferocious one, where some mosques were burned down, although far fewer than the number that wound up being burned down in this revolution. 250 mosques were eventually set on fire across Iran by protesters who've had it not only with this regime, but with Islam itself as a religion. So in 2017 to 18, we saw some pretty ferocious protests. And again, there were ones that were motivated by an economic crisis in 2019, and then a huge nationwide uprising in 2023. The 2022-23, the Women Life Freedom Uprising after the killing of Mahsa Amini. So there's a whole history of organically growing popular uprisings in Iran, which have a pattern of growing over the course of weeks and then ultimately being sustained in fits and starts for months. Okay, this has been the pattern. If you look at 2009 to 2010, the full extent of the protests went from about June of 2009 till about February of 2010, and it came in waves. And by the way, those who are not familiar with the history should also be apprised of the fact that the so-called Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1978 to 79 also took about at least 12 months, maybe even, if you count the very first protests, 18 months to unfold, okay? And just as in the case of that revolution and 2009 to 2010 uprising, in the Mahsa Amini uprising of 2023, the protests also extended in fits and starts over a very long period of time and grew sort of organically across the country. In this case, once the large gatherings began to form, Donald Trump, in his infinite wisdom, got onto Twitter and he made an ex-post saying, "Iranian people, we're behind you. Pour into the streets. Take over your institutions. You're not alone. We've got your back. Help is on the way." Now, it bears repeating, although I've said this many times on your show and in other contexts, that at least until now, the Iranian people are by far the most pro-American population on the face of the earth. By and large, a demographic majority of Iranians are much more pro-American, or have been, than Americans are. So forget the rest of the world. I mean, Europe, forget about it. I mean, let alone, China, whatever, or, the rest of the Islamic world. But Iranians are more pro-American than Americans are. I mean, actually, an increasingly large majority of Americans seem to hate this country, okay? Both on the left and on the right. I mean, I cannot think of anything more grotesquely un-American than Nick Fuentes' so-called America First, for example. It's as un-American as the radical left-wing people in an opposite direction. And they converge in bizarre ways, including their virulent anti-Semitism. Okay. So point being, Iranians, even if they're grossly misguided in doing so, they put a lot of stock in the word of the President of the United States, okay? And so when the President of the United States comes out and says, "Go, I'm behind you, this is it, we're going to do this," they're going to pour out into the streets, which is what they did. It wasn't like 2009, 2010, slow growth, or Mahsa Amini uprising. All of a sudden, somewhere between 5 and 8 million Iranians poured into the streets of every city and even towns, some of them small towns across the country. Millions and millions of people. And they did that. We have so many videos of Iranians who are saying, "Okay, I'm going out to protest. If I die, I hope that at least it leads to a free Iran. Thank you, President Trump. We know that we're not alone," etc. Okay. So they were given confidence to go out into the street in these large numbers. And that was, his first tweet was January 2nd. January 8th to 9th, they responded to that with this mass uprising. And one of the most tragic elements of this is that it appears that the only legitimate leader of the opposition, whose name has been the only opposition leader name chanted on the streets all across Iran, namely Reza Pahlavi, Okay, people went to their death. Even I may not necessarily agree in their degree of zeal for this character, but the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of Iranians who were killed, as we'll come to in a moment, died chanting the name of Reza Pahlavi and calling for his return to Iran. Okay, so one of the most tragic things here is that it appears that Reza Pahlavi was given assurances via Senator Lindsey Graham and other people in Trump's entourage that there would in fact be American intervention in support of the protesters. So Reza Pahlavi came out and formally called for people to turn up on the streets at a particular time, okay? 2 evenings in a row. And I believe our last conversation was like a couple days after that happened. So this was the nights of January 8th and 9th. January 8th and 9th. 5-8 million people in the streets. And they were massacred. You had people using AK-47s, okay, machine guns in the streets. Some of them security forces standing on the streets shooting at people. Some of them in pickup trucks driving around the city, shooting both people on the street and also shooting into people's windows because people were chanting various protest slogans against the regime, you know, from out of their windows. Death to the Islamic Republic and long live the king, Javid Shah, and, you know, this is the last struggle, Pahlavi will return, and so on and so forth. So they would listen for who's chanting out their windows, and they'd shoot into people's homes also from these flatbed pickup trucks with machine guns. They went around with some kind of a chemical spray, wearing protective gear themselves, and used some form of chemical weapon against unarmed civilian protesters, which still we don't, because we don't have access inside Iran. We don't know what exactly this thing was, but it's being investigated as basically a crime against humanity, the use of some kind of chemical weapon against an unarmed civilian population. The worst thing that this regime did, which also, though, is a sign of its desperation, is that they imported at least 5,000 Hasht al-Shabi, Iraqi Shiite militiamen, had them invade Iran's territory and sick these lunatics on the Iranian people. Okay, these are the most hardcore Arab Shiite fanatics who basically don't even speak Persian, right? And there were many videos of these people, and they basically came in and completely mowed down Iranians. And worse than that, there are stories of Hasht al-Shabi taking Iranians to the outskirts of town. And I'm sorry to have to say this in your program, but this needs to be documented. They took Iranians to the outskirts of town, men and women, and they would shoot them in their genitals and then leave them to slowly die. Some of them were retrieved and, you know, they're going to be maimed and mutilated for the rest of their lives. And others of them, you know, bled to death and died in agony. Now, I don't know whether it was the Hasht al-Shabi who did this or the regime security forces themselves. In any case, doesn't make very much difference. But we also have reports of women who were gang raped, and then they had their uteruses and sexual organs torn out, so that when their bodies were eventually retrieved, they were missing the evidence that they were gang raped because they were then mutilated subsequent to the rapes. So the degree of, I mean, just like grotesque, monstrous inhumanity demonstrated by this regime is beyond belief. They also killed children. I mean, I don't understand the logic of that, but I suppose once you bring Hasht al-Shabi into the picture, this is the kind of thing you're going to get. They also, by the way, brought in some Shiite militias from Pakistan, and some Afghan fighters. In any case, we have evidence of them killing children. They've also terribly wounded some children, hitting them in the face with pellet guns. Children, I mean like 3-4-year-old children who were out on the streets as like passerbys with their parents, just like bystanders.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the kind of, horrific massacre that we saw take place. In terms of the scale of it, the number that President Trump is using now is 35,000. Reza Pahlavi has cited basically close to 40,000 confirmed dead. But there are analyses that were done shortly after the massacres, and I watched this very carefully as it was unfolding, where basically we were able to come to an assessment of how many people were killed based on the fact that every single morgue in Iran was overflowing. So it's known what the capacities of morgues in Iran are and what the capacities of hospitals are. And if every single morgue is overflowing and there are literally body bags in the streets and others being taken literally like by the thousands into warehouses, because there's not a single morgue left that can store them in Iran, the numerical assessment of that situation leads to a number of more than 90,000 people killed. And it's interesting that General Flynn, who's close to the Trump administration, did cite that number, and he cited it as a figure that internally he had seen, okay, as part of military and intelligence assessments.
Yeah. It surprises me about General Flynn, who was usually seen as being a pro-Russia stooge, but, how do they say about the clock being right once a day? So it's possible.
Yeah, sure. So point being, this is the worst genocide, really, that has taken place since the Second World War. I mean, I forget how many people Pol Pot killed in Cambodia. Maybe that's the only other example on a par with this, but it certainly exceeds anything that happened in Yugoslavia or anywhere else, basically since the Holocaust. So, I mean, this is absolutely horrific. And Donald Trump made a second tweet as the massacre was unfolding. And he said that basically, again, we've got your back, and the regime better not start shooting protesters. It better not start shooting protesters, because if the regime starts shooting, we're going to start shooting, meaning U.S. military intervention. Now, he says this if they start shooting, while literally tens of thousands of Iranians are being mowed down by machine guns. Okay? Then he tweets one more time after the massacre, and then he holds a press conference in which he repeats the same thing, that if they start shooting people, et cetera, then we're going to intervene. And a few days, I believe it was after that, I think it wasn't even 1 week later, and there's still no intervention, right? And by the way, at that time, it was the night that I was heading back from New York after we did our last show together. The entire airspace over Iran and Iraq cleared, and there were indications from out of Israel that Israel was fully prepared for an American attack on Iran. They were prepared to receive missile strikes from out of Iran. And multiple countries evacuated their people from Iran. So we had every indication that an intervention was going to take place. And then Qatar and Erdogan in Turkey called Trump. And so then nothing happened. There was no strike. And then within, I think, 24 to 48 hours after that, Trump comes out and says, they were going to hang 800 some odd people. And we stopped them. I stopped them from hanging 800 some odd people. And that this weighed on him not to actually attack Iran, and instead to enter into negotiations with a regime that had just genocidally massacred Iranians to whom he had promised help. Okay? Which is particularly horrendous, because who did he get this assurance from that they weren't going to hang 800 whatever people? Foreign Minister Araghchi, who was negotiating with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. And this was a blatant lie. Okay, they didn't hang them from cranes the way they usually do, but they executed them quietly. We have many stories of Iranian prisoners who were given an injection before being released and allowed to go home. And within a day or two, they die. And they're all kind of reactions all over their body, like severe allergic reactions and blotches on their skin and whatever. They injected them with some kind of compound, which caused death, delayed death, within a day or two of their release from prison. And others were secretly executed in other ways. And we even have reports and some video footage, which if you go through my X feed for literally the last 2 months, it's nothing but documentation of what's going on in Iran. There was video footage of silos that had been filled with bodies, mass graves, set on fire, where basically, the bodies of all these people who had been secretly executed so that they wouldn't be publicly hung and brought to the attention of Trump could be disposed of. So, I mean, it's a literal Holocaust in the sense that, a Holocaust means a destruction of people by fire. And they were burning bodies en masse. And when they say 40,000 dead, 35,000, 40,000 dead, go ask how many families don't know where the hell their relative is. Those people are dead, or they're in prison being tortured and mutilated right now. So
25% of the population were massacred by the Khmer Rouge. So in comparison to that, what would you say the percentages?
What's the population of Cambodia?
I'll have to look that up and get back to you about that.
It would seem to me that it would be larger. That one would be larger. So that's why it came to my mind, Pol Pot. But other than, what a wonderful, precedent to compare yourself to. Other than Pol Pot, I think probably it's the largest genocidal massacre since the Second World War.
Yeah, Stalin is also in there, speaking of Stalin once again. But when it comes to the timeline here, eventually the United States and Israel did go into Iran. Would you say that the reason why they didn't go there sooner was just because Tweedledee and Tweedledum thought they could have some kind of a negotiation going before that, or for some other reason?
Well, let's talk a little bit about Tweedledee and Tweedledummer, okay? And the negotiations, because these negotiations went on for 1 month. They went on for 1 month. So, the Iranian people are massacred. They're waiting 1 week, 2 weeks, 3. Meanwhile, people are being mutilated in prison. They're being executed secretly, 3 weeks. And then instead of help is on the way being fulfilled after 3 weeks, Trump starts negotiations with the Islamic Republic, which then go on for a month. And initially, we're told the negotiation is over. Elimination of whatever's left of Iran's nuclear program, which, by the way, didn't Trump claim it was totally obliterated? I mean, what is there to negotiate over if he repeatedly came out and told us that he totally obliterated their program? All right. So number one, negotiation over elimination of the rest of Iran's nuclear program. Number two, they said it was going to be about basically either removing Iran's ballistic missile program or severely constraining it. And three, Iran's support for regional proxies, okay, like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen. Nothing about the Iranian people who were just massacred. And then it turns out that instead of negotiating over all these things, because Israel wants at least the ballistic missiles problem to be taken care of and so forth, they wind up negotiating over only nuclear. And initially, Rubio is even upset by this. And you can see conflicting statements between Rubio and Trump, where Rubio's like, no, it has to be comprehensive negotiation. And then Trump's, no, we'll negotiate over nuclear and solve that. And then we'll get to the other issues if that's successful. And there'll be sanctions relief after just the nuclear problem is dealt with. What does sanctions relief mean? Sanctions relief means giving a lifeline to a tyrannical Islamic fundamentalist regime that just genocidally massacred tens of thousands, maybe almost 100,000 people.
No different from Obama.
Much worse than Obama. Obama did not give this money to them after they genocidally massacred their population. The crushing of the 2009-2010 protests was bad, but it wasn't this bad. And also, Obama never promised the Iranian people that he was going to intervene on their behalf. He just openly disregarded them. Okay, so there was no false expectation.
Yeah, the traitor is worse than the enemy, so to speak.
Exactly. An oath breaker. Okay. And, in a culture where Mithra is now at the heart of the revival of ancient Iranian spirituality, and the worst thing in Mithraism is oath breaking. And, Mithra is, God of many things, but first and foremost of pacts and oaths. Okay. So, look. The negotiation was supposed to be about all these elements, and Trump was happy to reduce it simply to the nuclear issue and give sanctions relief to this regime. I think, based on everything we've seen unfold as it has, that Trump would have made a deal with this regime. Trump wanted to make a deal with this regime, and he was going to do it. And the reason I say that is because, first of all, they had subsequent meetings scheduled after the last one. And after the last one, the Omani foreign minister came out and did the news circuit. He went on various, media platforms to convey the message that, listen, we were close to a deal, and both sides were approaching some kind of an agreement, at least on the nuclear issue. But mainly the reason that I say that is because Marco Rubio came out and clearly stated, both in a congressional session, both in briefing Congress, and his remarks there were noted and reported by the press, and also in a more summary fashion in a press conference. In both of those venues, both inside Congress, briefing the Congress, and also at his press conference, Rubio clearly said the following: "We attacked Iran because we were apprised of the fact that the Israelis were going to attack. And we believed that if the Israelis attacked, our position in the Middle East would come under fire because, Trump had moved this giant, the Armada, right? The Armada that was on its way for weeks, right?"
Well, that by the way, that's the argument that some of the people in the chat are making, that what if all of this was just stalling for time until the Armada is right where it should be?
I'll come back to that in a minute. So Rubio says that we attacked only because we know that the Israelis were going to attack and the Iranians would subject all these assets to strikes. And we weren't going to sit there and absorb that. So we decided to go on the offensive. In other words, Israel pushed the United States into this intervention because basically Bibi was telling Trump, I'm going to go. Either you're coming, you're not coming, but we're going to do this. Which I fully expected that would happen, because I didn't think that the Israelis would miss the opportunity with all these American forces in the region to actually do something. Okay, so Rubio admits this, and then Trump comes out, and because he comes under pressure, of course, from the increasingly anti-Israeli American media, Trump comes under pressure that, you're doing the bidding of Israel, and Israel dragged you into this, and Trump makes one of his notoriously false statements, it's just blatant lie, where he says, no, if anything, I pushed Bibi into doing it, I convinced him he didn't. So, he's just the typical Trump, reversing the truth, to make himself look good. And then Rubio backtracks. And so that's the clearest indication to you of what actually happened. Okay, and how this, now let me address what the question from the chat was. Number one, if you don't have forces in the region that are capable of coming to the defense of the Iranian people, do not promise them that you've got their back 4 times when millions of people are in the streets and tens of thousands of people could be killed. If you don't have the forces, don't make false promises. Number two, we have the forces. The United States did not need a giant armada with 2 aircraft carriers and all these extra, fighter jets and so forth to offer some kind of support to the Iranian protesters to keep them motivated and keep them on the streets by attacking IRGC bases and by attacking the positions of security forces, and most importantly, by decapitating the regime with assassinations of Khamenei and his son Mojtaba. That could have been done with the forces that were already in the region, and it would have been tremendously galvanizing to the Iranian people. It also would have been terrifying to the regime, perhaps terminally crippling, paralyzing to the regime. Because you see, it was really emboldening to the Islamic Republic to see that Trump bluffed, that he didn't mean it, and that he waited and waited. And as he's supposedly bringing this armada into place, he engages in negotiations with them. To their mentality, that says this man is not serious. And instead, what could have happened, what should have happened, is that the minute he made those promises, he should have engaged in a limited intervention and ordered the armada at the same time. Okay? So that's, to me, a completely illegitimate excuse for the way, things unfolded.
So a false sense of security that wouldn't have been able to be done in this. Well, especially if he was encouraging the people to go out there. I mean, that already in terms of oath breaking is a horrible, horrible thing. Like the amount of lives that are gone now, thanks to Trump saying what he said.
I think what's even more horrible about it is that as this war began to unfold, I mean, we're only, 6 days into it or so, but within the first 48 hours, it became clear that Trump never had an intention to change the regime in Iran. Because we got reports that Trump, because they were asking him, so who's going to lead Iran after this? You took out the supreme leader. At that time, by the way, they were falsely reporting that Mojtaba Khamenei had been killed together with his father. There were false reports that Mojtaba had been killed with his father. How he survived that, I don't know. Or why it was so widely reported that Mojtaba was killed. That, by the way, is incredibly suspicious, that by itself. In any case, it was being widely reported they were both dead, and shortly thereafter, they said that they bombed the building of the Assembly of Experts, which is the clerical organization that chooses the next supreme leader. By they, I mean Israel bombed it. And so they were asking Trump, so who's going to lead Iran? And he said, well, I don't know, because the people that we had picked to lead are dead. And then our second choices after that are also dead. And in fact, our third choices, based on what we see, may be dead as well. Well, this means that you had a list, a 3-tier list of people from within this regime that you intended to put in place after massacring tens of thousands of Iranians. So tens of thousands of Iranians went into the streets chanting Javid Shah, long live the king, and, demanding the return of Pahlavi. This is the last struggle. Pahlavi will return. This is what they died for. A transition to a parliamentary democracy under Reza Pahlavi. And you decide that you're going to massacre them. You're going to encourage them into the streets. You're going to bait them into being slaughtered so that you can just replace Khamenei with a bunch of other mullahs and, technocrats of this accursed Islamic regime. This is really horrendous. And, Trump is so fucking stupid that he just says these things. It's like back in June, during the 12-Day War, at the end of the 12-Day War, when he aborted Operation Rising Lion. Operation Rising Lion was planned to last for at least a month. And the Israelis had made calculations of how many casualties they were willing to sustain from Iranian missile strikes. It was very, very high. It was something like they expected to sustain 5,000 deaths in Israel from Iranian missile strikes, and they were willing to do it. And the end goal was regime change. And just when they were getting to the point where they were going to start hitting regime targets, we did a whole show about this back then, Donald Trump imposed a ceasefire on both sides and started yelling at Israel and telling Israel they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And basically that they needed to pull the planes back, which were on their way to take out Khamenei and the regime leadership.
Yeah. And then he bragged about saving him.
And then he brags about saving Khamenei. He goes and tweets, I saved your life. You should be grateful. The Israelis knew exactly where you were and they were going to take you out. I saved you. So Trump just says this shit, you know, like someone should advise him. I mean, I'm speaking from a cynical political perspective right now. Someone should advise him not to come and admit to millions of Iranians that their compatriots were massacred just so that he could put other officials of the Islamic Republic in the place of Khamenei, right? Even if that was what we're going to do, you might not want to say that. But no, this guy, he just says it. But by the way, since I went there, let me just triple underline the fact that if Trump hadn't stopped Israel in June, all those poor Iranians wouldn't be dead right now. Okay? So simply by virtue of the fact that Trump aborted Operation Rising Lion, he is responsible for the fact that an Operation Roaring Lion was necessary at all, and that, you know, tens of thousands of Iranians were massacred on the way to it. So this man is doubly responsible. He, in two senses, he has the blood of tens of thousands of Iranians on his hands.
I think that right now the Iranians who are in the street, who are shouting Trump's name and doing the YMCA dance, to me, that's almost like a water in the desert type situation where maybe they understand Trump's incredible shortcomings here, but almost see it as, well, what choice do we have? Like, we have Trump and now he's on our side, so why not continue to galvanize something? Maybe it'll make him feel better, and maybe that'll steer Trump towards supporting regime change in Iran.
It's an incredibly desperate population who has been subjected to either, you know, tyranny and brutality for 47 years or exile for 47 years. And so their reaction is unreflective and borderline hysterical, frankly. And I don't think it's going to last very long, because Trump has now come out and made it very clear that he doesn't want Reza Pahlavi to lead Iran. He's made now repeated statements to the effect that, I mean, it's unbelievable.
You want somebody on the inside, right?
Well, so he says, we haven't really thought about him much. He hasn't been on our mind. We haven't really thought about him much at all. No, we haven't. This poor guy, Crown Prince Pahlavi, has repeatedly referenced Donald Trump, promised the Iranian people that Donald Trump would have their back, has repeatedly thanked Donald Trump, has gone and done a press circuit promising that Donald Trump is going to do the right thing in Iran. And Donald Trump comes and says he hadn't thought about him very much. And he thinks that it will be better. Well, Reza Pahlavi, he's a very nice guy. He's said this now. Trump has said this now a number of times. He's a very nice person. I think it seems like a very nice person, which is Trump's way of insulting somebody. That is Donald Trump's way of insulting somebody.
You said this on the last episode we had in New York City, where Trump doesn't really want to deal with nice people, because when somebody's a proven asshole, that's somebody that you have the ability to bully around, and it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it only pays if you're a narcissistic, sadistic, power-hungry person. It only pays off to dominate strong people. You know, you want to dominate tough assholes. That's what Donald Trump likes to do. That's his MO. And so he says, no, I would prefer that it be somebody who's there, who's on the inside. He says somebody who's popular, who's already there on the inside, who's moderate. Well, we don't have anybody like that in Iran. Number one, the reason that Reza Pahlavi is leading the opposition is that at this point, no Iranian trusts anybody from within this regime, not anybody. And precisely for the same reason that a bunch of ignoramuses think that Reza Pahlavi is not qualified, namely the fact that he's been outside the country for 47 years, is the reason why the majority of Iranians trust him, because he's had nothing to do with this regime, you see? So the only person that Trump could be referring to when he says somebody popular from the inside is Hassan Rouhani. And that may be because moron advisors of his have come to him and said, look, this former president, Hassan Rouhani, who's a cleric also, he's a mullah, 2 presidents ago in Iran, okay? This mullah is very well educated. He went to school in Britain. He goes to the World Economic Forum. He's friends with Klaus Schwab, right? He's Ayatollah.
Yeah, that's what the Trump supporters love, by the way. The World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab, right?
Right. Yeah, as if Trump has given a fuck about the rest of the MAGA agenda either. Okay, so he's been the boy of that global financial elite basically for his entire presidency, despite what his MAGA base wanted to believe going into it. In any case, they come and they show him this, that, hey, look at this guy, Hassan Rouhani. He won with a 70% majority vote back, 2 presidential elections ago in Iran. So he seems popular. Let's put him in charge. He's a reformist. So I guarantee you this is what Trump is thinking. And when we found out that the CIA, get this. So, I mean, man, this is fucking unbelievable. So Trump comes out and he says, they killed our first choices. They killed our second choices. Who killed? Well, clearly it means Israel killed. It means, and the press stories reporting this, it basically put 2 and 2 together and came to this conclusion that Israel was choosing its own targets without consultation with the United States. Yeah. And Israel's aim was regime change. And so Israel kept hitting targets which the United States intended to turn into the subsequent administration of Iran.
And now so we got the no-kill list.
Yeah, so finally the CIA gives Mossad a no-kill list and says, listen, fuckers, these people, they're protected. Do not kill them. And I guarantee you Hassan Rouhani is #1 name on that list, followed shortly thereafter by Javad Zarif, the former foreign minister who negotiated the Obama nuclear deal. And a bunch of other, and who's friends with John Kerry, by the way. His family married into John Kerry's family. And a bunch of other similar cockroaches, including this woman, Narges Mohammadi, who's a Nobel laureate human rights activist of the kind that's in fact a shill for the regime and wants an Islamic Republic light, Islamic Republic 2.0. She's a big critic of Israel. They have anti-Semite, typical leftist SJW discourse comes from out of her. And so they give the Mossad this kill list because clearly, I shouldn't say Trump's preference. I mean, Trump doesn't know jack shit. I mean, but clearly the people who are controlling Trump and manipulating him, namely the CIA, want to preserve the Islamic Republic in a severely weakened form without its nuclear program, without ballistic missiles, without a navy. One of the #1 objectives of the United States, which has been articulated by mainly Hegseth, but also Rubio, is that they plan to wipe out Iran's entire navy. Because, of course, the Persian Gulf is of tremendous strategic significance, particularly the Strait of Hormuz, which the Iranian Navy currently controls. It's a choke point for a large percentage of the world's oil. And by the way, also 50% of the food that's consumed in the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf comes through the Strait of Hormuz. Yeah. Okay? So they plan to wipe out Iran. So they want an Islamic Republic light, a weakened form of this regime, without a nuclear program, without ballistic missiles, with the IRGC probably integrated into the regular military, with no more support for proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis and so forth, and with no naval capability, so that Iran can remain a retarded, backwards, weak, isolated country that poses no threat or challenge to anyone, rather than a strong Iran that would be pro-American and an ally and partner of the United States.
Well, this brings up a comment that a good friend of the show, Didier, posted to me a couple of hours back. And this is in relation to what's going on right now with Israel and, well, the CIA as well, and the incursion, the alleged incursion of Kurdish forces on the borders of Iran. So he says the following: if I put my Bibi hat on, what does Israel gain from maintaining the IRGC at any level in power? Their fall means the end of Hamas and Hezbollah. Lebanon is moving quickly in that direction. The Syrian president is talking like he's surrounded now. The IRGC surviving would mean a scaling up of terrorist attacks in Israel and in the region.
Israel does not want anything to survive from the IRGC. Okay, again, to expand on the point that I was just making, the United States and Israel have two different objectives here. That's become abundantly clear. The United States might want some of the IRGC to survive. And by the way, let me just make this point very clearly right now, which is that several days before this started, I posted a very clear plan for what I thought a 72-hour regime change in Iran should look like. Now, suppose that's somewhat idealistic. Okay, expand it to double the length of time. But really, in very short order, a number of vital objectives could have been achieved which weren't. And maybe the most important of them is that the whole IRGC should have been decimated. Now it's become difficult because the Americans kept the IRGC relatively intact because they intended them to be part of a transition to an Islamic Republic 2.0. And so now these IRGC cockroaches went into schools. They have set up their bases in schools where children are attending the schools.
Yeah.
Okay?
Not too different from Hamas.
Of course. Who the fuck do you think Hamas learned from?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, so look, the IRGC, we know they can decimate the IRGC. Right now in Tehran, basically all the IRGC bases have been decimated. So they could have done this in every Iranian city and town. Massive bombardment of all the IRGC bases. Not hard, man. Launch cruise missiles. Okay, there will be collateral damage. Iranian people are clearly ready to die for their freedom. All right? You didn't even need to do this with airplanes. Cruise missiles. Hit all the IRGC bases and decimate them. So America didn't want that. Israel would want that. America didn't want that. So America and Israel have two different objectives. We already outlined what the American objective is, coming from out of the CIA, okay? The Israeli objective is to topple the Islamic Republic. That much is clear. They do not want a continuation of this regime, and therefore also they don't want a continuation of the IRGC. The question is this, and this question now arises because of what we're seeing unfold with the Kurds, where about, what was it? I'd say 2 to 3 days ago, hard to tell because of the time zone difference, but videos started to emerge. I think it was about 2 days ago, but they were probably videos taken 3 days ago, where, and I didn't post on this when I saw them because it seemed bizarre to me and I didn't know what the hell was going on and I didn't repost it at the time. But there were videos basically showing Israel bombing border guard positions all along the Iranian border with Iraq in the Kurdish region. There are 4 provinces of Iran that have a Kurdish majority, okay? People sometimes get confused about, even Iranians get confused about this sometimes, because the Islamic Republic has redistricted. They've redistricted so much of Iran to try to protect against secessionism. So they took large provinces and chopped them up in a lot of cases. Like, for example, in Azerbaijan, they chopped Azerbaijan into like 3 different provinces instead of the one that it used to be. Anyway, there are now 4 different provinces of Iran, only one of which is called Kurdistan, actually called Kurdistan province.
Mm-hmm.
There are 3 others where there's also a Kurdish majority. And along this whole stretch of Iran, there were border towns where border guard positions were bombed. And I saw videos of Iranians passing by and being like, what the fuck? Why'd they kill the border guard for? That's not like an IRGC thing. That's like border guard. And so this weird video started to emerge. And then within like 24 hours after that, we started getting these reports, these rumors, and then eventually reports, which now have appeared in Axios, Barak Ravid, reports in the Jerusalem Post, in CNN, and also Fox News. So it's not a left-wing or right-wing thing. Both Fox News and CNN are reporting that there's an operation that's been planned to basically arm Kurdish separatists let me get into this in some detail. To arm Kurdish separatists and send them to secure a part of Iran as an autonomous zone, okay, to take positions in Western Iran and turn it into a Kurdish autonomous zone. Now, the background for this that you have to understand is that about 5-6 days ago, maybe it was a week ago, 5 Iranian Kurdish groups, which have generally not seen eye to eye, because some of them are straight up terrorist organizations, separatist terrorists, of the left wing, radical left wing persuasion, and others of them are more like democratic federalist minded people who only want like sort of relative regional autonomy under a democratic federalist system, right? So there are some differences among these groups, and generally they didn't work together. Well, those 5 Kurdish groups of Kurds in Iranian Kurdistan, Iranian Kurdish groups, they got together and formed a united front under a singular leadership. And the guy leading them hates Reza Pahlavi. He hates Reza Pahlavi. Reza Pahlavi tried to work with him back in the Women Life Freedom movement, where, you know, basically the Crown Prince formed a more broad-based coalition with other opposition leaders, including this Abdullah Muhtadi Cockroach. And it was impossible because the guy kept insisting on essentially a form of autonomy in Kurdistan that creates the conditions and clears the ground for an eventual secession of the province from the country. And if you know anything about the history of secessionism in modern Iran, the Kurds are the worst example of foreign powers trying to come in and cut off pieces of Iran and weaken Iran. It started with the British in the 1930s, the 20s and 30s, with this Simcoe character, where basically they wanted to weaken both Iran and the Ottomans by backing this guy to basically engineer a discourse of Kurdish separatism and Kurdish nationalism, quote unquote, which is some complete cockamamie bullshit. If you look at the actual history of the Kurds as an Iranian people who speak an Iranian language, who've been part of the fabric of Iranian civilization for 3,000 years, the Ottomans basically put this guy up to manufacture this discourse and to attempt a secession at that time, which was put down forcefully by Reza Shah the First, Reza Shah the Great. And then his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the late Shah, had to deal with another Kurdish uprising in Mahabad, which I mentioned at the beginning of our show, where in 1946, remember that in World War II, the Americans and the British came into the south of Iran, and the Russians came down and occupied northern Iran, right? Because Reza Shah had leaned toward the Axis. He was officially neutral, but unofficially he was leaning toward the Axis powers, mainly because the British had fucked Iran so badly throughout the course of history, okay? And you know, there were other factors like the Aryan discourse of Nazi Germany and, you know, Iran's Aryan heritage that was being appropriated by the Nazis and so forth. And so the Soviets came down into northern Iran, but at the end of the war, they were supposed to leave in 1945. Well, they held on to Azerbaijan, not the Republic of Azerbaijan, which so-called Republic of Azerbaijan, which the Tsarists took from Iran in the Russo-Persian Wars in the 1800s, the late 1800s. Iran lost the whole Caucasus. The whole Caucasus was Iran until 200 years ago. And Iran lost that northern part of Azerbaijan. Actually, it's called Aran. The Soviets call, you know, that place is not even called Azerbaijan. You know that? The so-called Republic of Azerbaijan. It's fake name. It's a fake name.
Another fake country.
Absolutely. The reason the Soviets called it that is because they wanted they wanted actual Iranian Azerbaijan. And so they renamed Aran Azerbaijan so that then they could call the rest of Azerbaijan South Azerbaijan and have designs for taking that too, which they did between 1945 and 1946.
What about the Azeris?
So listen, I'm getting into it. So
okay,
they took that area, and the Shah had to come with tanks and tried to get the fucking Soviets out. And he sent his sister on a diplomatic mission to the Soviet Union, Ashraf Pahlavi, very strong woman, crazy, insane, but brilliant tactician, that woman. Anyway, I'll maybe come back to her later, because she wrote a very interesting book where she basically said the CIA engineered the overthrow of my brother, and it's America's fault. Anyway, so the Shah had to drive them out. The other thing that happened, though, to go back to my main point, is that simultaneously to their taking our Azerbaijan in the northwest of Iran, they engineered a Kurdish uprising in Mahabad and declared the so-called Mahabad Republic, which was going to become an SSR, Soviet Socialist Republic of Kurdistan.
Yeah, okay? Stalin.
So these people have a history, and it's from that time onward that the armed Kurdish groups all began to take on a very communist, Marxist, Stalinist, character. Okay, and so that's the genealogy of the type of groups which now supposedly both Israel and the United States intend to back to take a part of Iran and fight the IRGC to turn it into an autonomous zone. A couple more details about this. In the early stages of the reporting on this, the White House denied that it was involved. And then it came out that Netanyahu, in phone calls with Trump, had proposed to Trump that he use these Kurds, which Israel had been arming since December. Now, that particular fact really disturbed me, and this has been carried by multiple news stories, repeated by multiple media outlets, that Israel started bringing arms into northern Iraqi Kurdistan with the intent of having these arms transferred to Iranian Kurds inside Iran as far back as December. Well, if you look at the timing of the uprising in Iran and all that, it's a little bit suspicious. Okay? So there's that. And then there's the fact that Israel has had an intelligence and security relationship with these groups going back decades. And I have to, share with your viewers that in the time when I was engaging with multiple representatives of the Mossad, a high-level Mossad operative, once, because I was protesting among my many grievances with Israel at that time in 2017, was that they were backing these separatist groups, mainly Kurdish separatists, but also Azeri separatists, by the way. So you were asking about the Azeris. Right now, another thing that's happening is that the president of Azerbaijan has ordered his military to the border with Iran. So it appears that simultaneous to a Kurdish incursion, we may well see an Azeri incursion that's also backed by Israel, because Israel has a very close security relationship with the Republic of Azerbaijan. In any case, this high-level Mossad operative said to me, because I was saying to him, look, you need to, if you want an alliance with Iranian nationalists, where we can build this tremendous security structure in the whole region, with your sphere of influence and our sphere of influence, based on these deep cultural ties going back 2,500 years, okay? Your partner are Iranian nationalists. And if you want to work with us, you need to stop supporting these riffraff, terrorist, separatist scum. And you don't need them, okay? Because your ally is the majority of people in Iran and the military that's going to be constituted by them. And this guy was telling me, no, we have to use the Kurds. We have to use the Kurds. Later you can shoot them. You should use them too. You use them, later you shoot them. I direct quote. Okay? So first of all, to our dear Kurdish compatriots, you're going to be slaughtered. You're being set up for a slaughter. Okay? If an independent, autonomous Kurdistan is carved out of Iran, maybe in the chaos of transition from the Islamic Republic to another regime, it can survive 2 years, 3 years, maybe 5 years. Eventually, the Iranian national military is going to come for you. Don't do this, okay? That's the first thing. I mean, the majority of Kurds don't want to secede from Iran. Most of them consider themselves Iranian. Historically, ethnographically, they're absolutely hardcore Iranian people. There are, accounts of them from the days of the Medes, okay, let alone the Achaemenids and the Sassanids and so forth. You can go search in any ethnography and linguistics textbook. Kurdish is an Iranian language. There's actually 4 different dialects of Kurdish, but they're all Iranian languages. And the Kurds are ethnically, genetically Iranian people, always have been. They're not Iraqis, they're not Syrians, they're not Turks. And so the relationship that the Kurds have to these countries where they have a legitimate argument for autonomy is not the same relationship that they have to Iran. So Kurds are perfectly legitimate in demanding autonomy from Iraq, secession and independence from Iraq, Syria, Turkey. 1/4 of Turkey is Kurdish. So those are entirely legitimate demands. These poor people are not Turks. They're not Arabs. They're Iranians and always have been. And matter of fact, for a lot of reasons, actually, the Kurds are more Iranian than Persians because they're so insular and have been so isolated in those mountains that both on a genetic level and in terms of the preservation of some very ancient religious traditions and cultural practices, in some ways, the Kurds are the most well-preserved group of Iranians from ancient times. By the way, I also have a personal relationship to them insofar as my paternal grandmother's family governed Kurdistan. Okay, so for over 100 years, my grandma's family, the Dolat Shahis, were the governors of all of Kurdistan from out of Kermanshah.
Wow.
So they spoke Kurdish, and I grew up listening to Kurdish music, which I loved, and frankly, I have to admit, preferred to Persian music. It's more ancient. There's something about, because you see, the Persian classical music was formalized with this radif system in the 1800s by a group of very meticulous, systematic Persian composers. In the 1800s, they formalized the system of what you might call classical Persian music, okay? The Kurdish music never underwent that. It's folk music. And so there's a lot of the raw force of ancient Iranian music and the mysticism embedded in it, which survives in like Kurdish tanbur and daf music. And I wrote about this tradition in Iranian Leviathan at some length, the Ahl Haq, and how they basically are preserving forms of Mithraism, both the Yazidis and the Ahl Haq, who are almost identical to them on the Iranian side of the border, are preserving Mithraic traditions, which you can feel through the resonance of Kurdish music. Anyway, point being, I have a connection to these people, and I deeply value them as an integral part of the civilizational fabric of Iran. So they're being set up for a horrendous tragedy by a bunch of corrupt leftist ideologues who are the tools of foreign powers. And I really hope that they don't make this mistake and that they aren't used in this way. And I hope that Israel doesn't make this mistake, although it appears to be unfolding in real time.
The things that I was able to personally find, and this is also, I want to do a shout out to Neo Berg, good friend of the show, and I was conversing with her online about well, what are the videos that we can look at to show these incidents at the border with the killing of the border guards? Unfortunately, I was not able to find those particular videos with anything having to do with the border patrol areas, but I was able to find, as I was showing on the screen a bit earlier, videos having to do with the border towns being bombed along with some of the prisons where they had Kurdish people. So that is a sign that Israel, as far as, being up in the sky, doing something pretty significant in that area. Now, as far as what you just said regarding Israel bringing weapons to the Kurds, again, I'm looking for the specific evidence. So far from the Wall Street Journal article that I was reading, it was a claim based on an anonymous source right now, which, again, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. I'm just really trying to get the concrete evidence.
The sources would have to be anonymous,
sure,
right now, because
that's
okay. Let me, in this connection, let me bring to people's attention something very disturbing, which is that we had this. I don't know the guy personally, Dr. Shahram Makoui, who is an ardent monarchist. Very well, he's a medical doctor, but who took time from out of his career and personal life to basically broadcast sometimes multiple times a day, reporting news, and also, basically providing political guidance and counsel as a member of the Iranian opposition. And he was reporting this story in detail, and his X account has been suspended. Now, this guy is a very respectable, moderate, carefully spoken, person who's super pro-Israel and pro-America. Would put the Israeli and American flag behind him during some of his statements. And he's not. He doesn't come across as a raving lunatic the way that sometimes I might. So there's no reason why this guy's X account should have been suspended. And I suspect that the reason he was taken offline is that he was sharing tactical intelligence information, because he was sharing from the ground reports of the Israeli bombings of the positions along the Kurdish border, and saying, what the fuck is this? There is no purpose or rationale for this unless you wanted to bring forces across the border into Iran. So I hope that, I don't know what's happened with his account, but I hope that it's restored before long and nothing's gone too terribly wrong with him.
And if anybody, by the way, has any of these videos in archives or other accounts, please feel free to write later on in the comment section or maybe in the chat so we can take a look at them as well. And by the way, the super chats, just so you guys know, there is a limit of $10 just because I am anticipating there being a lot of super chats that are going to be coming in later on. And let's say maybe in about half an hour from now for the super chats, Jason?
Yeah. If we want to go even sooner than that, that's fine too. Okay. Let me point out a few more things, though, that I find disturbing in the connection to what we were just talking about, namely Israel and separatism and so forth. There has been this controversy in the social media sphere and in some media outlets during the whole of the revolution of the Lion and Sun over Persia versus Iran, with a lot of well-meaning but ignorant foreigners saying things like, let's make Iran Persia again. Let's make Persia great again, and so on and so forth. Thinking that somehow this is valorizing Iran's ancient heritage, or highlighting the fact that Iran is a great ancient civilization and so forth. But mainly this discourse has come from out of Israel. And Prime Minister Netanyahu himself, in all of his Hebrew statements, exclusively uses the term Persia. Not exclusively, I don't want to exaggerate, but often uses the term Persia and Persians instead of Iran and Iranians. And this has real significance, okay? This is something that needs to be analyzed a little bit. So first of all, let me give a 101, okay? Idiot's guide, okay, to people who don't know anything about this subject. Iran was never called Persia by Iranians. Never, ever. did Iranians call Iran Persia. The name Persia comes from the fact that the capital district of the Achaemenid Empire of Iran was called Parsa, which the Greeks called Persis, which is where Persepolis is, okay? City of the Persians. And so the way that, news correspondents refer to Russia by Moscow. Moscow announced today that they're going to be cutting defense spending by 10%, whatever, right? The Greeks used to refer to all of Iran as Persia in that same way because its capital district was Pars. And that name stuck in Greece. And because Greece became the foundation of Western civilization, the exonym for Iran, exonym, meaning the name that foreigners call a country, the exonym for Iran in the West became Persia, or La Perse, or whatever, in whatever language, okay, Western language, some variation of Persia. Iran, at the time that the Greeks started calling it Persia, Iran was called Ariana. Iran continued to be called Ariana during the entire Parthian dynasty. So the Greeks come and they conquer the Achaemenid Empire. Then after 150 years of Greek colonization, the Parthians come down from northern Iran. They're a branch of the Scythians. They take over, they kick the Greeks out, reestablish self-determination, build their own empire. And the Parthians continued to refer to the country as Ariana, okay? The land of the Aryans. And by the way, Herodotus tells us in the histories that even before the Achaemenids, the Median kingdom referred to itself as Ariana, and its people were called Arioi. And he says, what Herodotus claims is they changed their name to Medes because Medea, the sorceress from the Caucasus, wound up basically becoming the priestess queen of this civilization, and she was so influential that they renamed themselves after Medea and became the Medes. But they were originally called the Aryans. And so the people there were just Aryans, and their place was Ariana, okay? And all Iran is the Middle Persian contraction from the Old Persian Ariana, Middle Persian contraction, Iran, okay? So the country used to be called Ariana Khashatra, the Imperium of Ariana, and then it became Iran Shahr in Middle Persian during the Sassanid period. So that's what Iranians have always called Iran. It just means the Aryan place where the Aryans live, namely the Iranians, who consist of many different groups, the Persians being only one of them, usually the ruling group, the Persians, but not always. The Parthians were not Persians. The Parthians were a branch of the Scythians, and they had a hell of an empire and a hell of a culture which rivaled Rome for hundreds of years, okay? So, and was based on Mithraism, which then spread into the Roman Empire and was deeply influential in the history of European civilization. In any case, the use of Persia instead of Iran to refer to Iran today is extremely dangerous. And here's a mistake that I think Reza Shah may have made because, up to 1935, Iran was legally referred to as Persia by basically the whole world, certainly the Western world, in all official documents. It was the exonym of the country, whereas Iran was the endonym, the native name of the country. And Reza Shah in 1935 asked foreigners to refer to Iran by its endonym, which is a rather bizarre thing to do, by the way. I mean, nobody, imagine Germany asking all the countries in the world, no, call us Deutschland. We don't want to be called Germany anymore. Yeah, this is Deutschland. What the fuck is that? That's a little bit bizarre. Countries all have endonyms, which are different from their exonyms. Like the Greeks call Greece Hellas. Yeah. Okay. So,
by the way, we do have a comment over here. Somebody who apparently speaks Hebrew, who says that Iran is referred to as Iran in all Hebrew media. Sometimes we call it Paras, but not when referring to the modern state. He also says Paras and Madai, Persia in media, yes. But an official communication, it's called Iran.
I know. I read the Old Testament
Yeah.
many times. I used to teach the Old Testament. Paras and Madai is the way that the Old Testament uses to refer to all of Iran. And sometimes they refer to only Paras and sometimes to Madai, and also Elam. Elam is a very important biblical reference to Iran. Elam is that area around Shusha, Susa, which predates the arrival of the Aryans in Iran and was its own civilization from the time of the Sumerians and so forth. And that part of Iran is also extensively in the Bible. But in any case, Paras, Madai, Shushan, or Elam are all terms that the Jews historically used to refer to Iran. And you're right, in official communications, of course, Israel uses the term Iran. But I'm talking about Bibi Netanyahu's discourse. And when you hear him mention Iran and the Persians, Iran and Iranians, he often uses the term Persia and Persians. And that discourse has been promulgated by a number of Israeli, not just officials, but also basically analysts, commentators, people connected to intelligence, and people in the social media and journalistic commenting sphere. And I have to look, and not, again, it could be in some cases well-meaning ignorance, where like they're trying to say, well, you know, we want to dissociate your people from the horrible things the Islamic Republic has done and associate you with this great ancient Persian civilization and its glory and so forth, right? But there could be another nefarious agenda. And so here I think, again, Reza Shah may have made a mistake to ask countries to refer to Iran, Iran as Iran, rather than by the name Persia, because ever since then, 1935, when he did this, okay, a leftist, again, Soviet initially based, but then later also British supported, globalist backed discourse of secessionism and the Balkanization of Iran has been engineered, where this false notion is promulgated that Persia refers to exclusively Persian-speaking people. In other words, that the people who speak Persian, Parsi, or in its Arabized form, Farsi, which, by the way, should always be called Persian when speaking English. Again, its endonym is Parsi or Farsi, but its exonym is Persian, the Persian language. So there's been this notion promulgated by these globalist-backed and leftist secessionists that the Persian heritage belongs only to these Persians, and somehow Persians are lording over all of Iran, and that somehow Persia is an exclusive heritage of the Persians, and it's some kind of a domineering imperial sort of behemoth lurking over other oppressed ethnic minorities.
The Persian Empire.
Yeah, it's a utterly bizarre notion that has no grounding in the complexity and actual warp and weft of the tapestry of Iranian history. Again, we had no Persian Empire. There was never a Persian Empire. It's the Achaemenid Empire of Iran, or the Parthian Empire of Iran. And when you look at these structures like the Achaemenid Empire, you see that it was at least as much a Scythian empire and a Median empire as it was, Persian. So the use of Persia to refer to Iran has been co-opted by secessionists who have a Balkanizing agenda. And I'm very concerned that what the Israelis may be trying to do, okay, is change the regime in Iran, but have Iran collapse into a rump state of Persia with which they think they can have good relations based on the historical and cultural ties to the children of Cyrus who liberated them and so forth, and Darius who rebuilt their temple for them. And at the same time that they can have an ally in an independent Kurdistan that includes territory carved out of Iran. And my message to the Israelis is that if this is the delusion in your heads, disabuse yourself of it immediately. Because the minute that some autonomous Kurdish territory is carved out of Iran and Kurdish secessionist flags go up in Iranian cities and towns, with Israeli backing and Israeli approval and recognition, the worst enemies you will have on this planet will be the Persian people, because they had nothing but the best intentions to be your foremost ally. They were the most pro-Israeli population on the planet, okay? And moreover, they're the people to whom you owe your existence. The entire discourse of a nation of Israel, which was revived in 1946, owes itself to the biblical history post-Babylonian exile that was afforded to the Jewish people by Iran under Cyrus, under Darius, and under Xerxes. Okay, remember, if the Purim story is true, it's Xerxes who had thousands of his own officials rounded up and killed in order to save the lives of the Jews that had been served so well by both Cyrus and Darius, who effectively were history's first Zionists, right? I've spent a long time, years actually, going back to Iranian Leviathan, developing this sophisticated discourse of Iranian Zionism on a philosophical, conceptual level, okay? So it's very, very disturbing to see this unfolding. And I hope we don't, it's too early to tell. I hope that we don't wind up witnessing any part of Western Iran transformed into some autonomous Kurdish territory with the backing of the state of Israel.
Now, if we were to break down what's going on right now, going back to my friend Didier's comment of this wouldn't benefit Israel to have the IRGC, the reason why he mentioned the IRGC specifically was in the context of arming these Kurds. Because the idea here is that if the Kurds start going through the border and claiming this territory, that would be such a great reason for the IRGC to rally some of the fence-sitters right now, who otherwise could have been on board with getting rid of this regime, to actually join up with this regime against what they see as this existential threat on the borders. So if I were an Israeli intelligence guy, which I swear I'm not, but if I was an Israeli intelligence, I would look at that and say, what's going on here? This is ridiculous. Why are we empowering the IRGC when we could empower a future nationalist Iran against people who, even though right now, like the Arab states, are trying to channel their inner Las Vegas, to all the rubes out there. Meanwhile, as we were talking about before in New York City, they're funneling money towards the building of mosques all around the world. So why are these people considered to be our so-called allies in the long term here? This just seems like a really, really stupid idea.
So, Lev, during the entire years-long engagement in which I have attempted to develop a discourse of Iranian Zionism and a framework for a strategic partnership between Iran and Israel. You can go look at my Substack. By the way, now that I've remembered to say anything about my Substack, where you can find a piece on my vision for an Iranian-Israeli partnership. Okay? It's called Partnership, Not Peace. I've turned my entire Substack into basically support for the Iranian people over the past 2 months. Just constant Iranian studies articles about the history and culture and, theological, basically structures of ancient Iranian beliefs and various philosophical systems and, historical figures and so forth. So my Substack support has been decimated on account of this. Decimated. Apparently, most of the people who don't give a fuck about Iran and who are my Substack followers have abandoned my Substack. So if you actually care about Iran, please support my Substack, because I've made the decision to take that hit and basically turn my Substack, in addition to everything else, into a platform of support for Iran.
Posted the link in the chat, by the way, for everybody who's paying attention there.
I appreciate that. So you can see in my Substack this piece, partnership, not peace. Okay. In other words, this talk of peace between Iran and Israel, I always found to be ridiculous. We're going to bring Iran into the Abraham Accords and there's going to be peace with it. What the fuck are you talking about? The potential existed there for the closest alliance between any two countries on the planet. And I've outlined that in detail, and I spent years developing the conceptual foundation for it, okay? And in all that time, Lev, this is all to go answer your question. In all that time, Lev, I have had people with deep connections in Israel, high-level connections, tell me, Jorjani, you don't understand what you're doing. You don't understand these people. Don't listen to Netanyahu with all his speeches he gives to the Iranian, Bibi has been giving speech after speech to the Iranian people, at least since the 12-day war back in June. Actually, I think for months leading up to that. It was even longer. You know, when it began was during the Mahsa Amini uprising, during the Women Life Freedom uprising in 2023. Netanyahu started giving these relatively regular addresses to the Iranian people, which were very heartwarming and beneficent and promising, and won over a lot of Iranian nationalists. I mean, Iranian people were generally pro-Israel to begin with, both for historical, cultural reasons that are obvious, and also because it's the enemy of their enemy. Israel is the enemy of their enemy. But this really enamored a lot of Iranians to Netanyahu. And there were a number of other Israeli officials who did similar things, especially Gila Gamliel, who became a darling of a lot of Iranian people in the opposition and who went out of her way to support Reza Pahlavi very strongly. During a time when she was head of Israeli intelligence, she brought Reza Pahlavi to Israel and toured him around and got him a meeting with Netanyahu and so forth. And she's been campaigning for Reza Pahlavi ever since then. Initially as head of intelligence. Now she's the Minister of Science and Technology. And then Naftali Bennett made a lot of supportive statements, recognizing the greatness of Iran based on its history and basically, paying tremendous respect to the Iranian people, right? And all this while, I had people telling me, don't be deceived by this. These Jews don't trust anybody. They don't want a strong partner. They don't want anyone strong. They want to be surrounded by weak, fragmented countries that they can control. Okay? So they would prefer that Iran be weakened, fragmented, demoralized, and that it remain a backward country and a dysfunctional country, a basket case that is in a state of perpetual destabilization, rather than that Iran becomes a strong partner and ally on the chance that perhaps for whatever reason someday, that strong Iran, which frankly, if Iran were left to itself, will become a world power again. I mean, look, we're literally talking about the only country in history that established 5 world empires. 5. Italians did it once. Mussolini was kind of chicken shit. He was like, Hitler's junior. So they had 1 Roman Empire. Okay, let's say if you want to count the Byzantines, they had 2. All right. But, during the Italian Renaissance, during the great Renaissance of Italy, Italy didn't even have a country. The Italian Renaissance took place without a central Italian state. So there's no other country on earth which was conquered by the Greeks, invaded by the Romans, conquered by the Arabs, the Turks, the Mongols, and every time it comes back, not just as a country, it comes back as a world-class empire. There's no other country like that. So if left to itself, Iran will become a world power again, and there are other reasons why also, which we could go into later. Why geostrategically, geophysically, for a variety of reasons, Iran probably will become a world power in very little time unless there are forces actively working to undermine that. And so these folks would, they tell me that, look, the Israelis don't want that strong Iran because it might be their ally and, they might have a very constructive relationship with it, but what if someday, for whatever reason, that Iran turns on them? And what they tried to convey to me is that for whatever historical and cultural reasons, Jews don't trust anybody. They're constantly afraid of being betrayed and backstabbed. And so they would rather just weaken and manipulate everybody around them. And I refused to believe that. And, for years and years, I've taken the risk of being, the most outspoken person in terms of an Iranian-Israeli partnership. And when I first came out with Iranian Zionism in 2017, man, did I come under assault within the Iranian opposition in particular. Forget the American, anti-Semite garbage people who are still, on my case about it. But even within the Iranian opposition, people were not enthusiastic about now history caught up with me. So, the Iranians eventually came around to being as pro-Israel as I was advocating years ago, and effectively, became Zionists.
But now I think a lot of the people, including some of the people in the chat and some of the people on X, as I've seen, they're seeing you as the prodigal son, returning back into the fold, saying, finally, Jason, you've seen the light about these pesky Jews, and now we could finally move on, with this
I haven't seen anything final. I haven't seen anything finally. It will depend on what happens in Iran. And so we have to say, look, they're saying from all, and by the way, just before we went on air, literally like 5 minutes before we went on air, I saw something from a very high level American deep state actor, which I'm not going to mention his name because I had personal dealings with the guy, basically detailing what the operation is and that they're intending to turn Sanandaj, the city of Sanandaj in Kurdistan province of Iran, into the capital of an autonomous region. So I hope this is wrong. If it's true, it's going to unfold in very short order. So I don't know, by sometime early next week, we're going to see if moves are made in this direction. Meanwhile, you've got the Islamic Republic, both the head of parliament, Ghalibaf, and President Pezeshkian came out and said, we're sending forces to crush these separatists. So we're going to see this unfold in very short order. And I hope that it's not the case, that Israel will support some kind of a armed secessionist uprising in Western Iran.
As far as the choices that could possibly be made here with Iran, if, let's say, the Kurds end up taking a certain amount of territory for a little while, would they be able to be pushed back? Like, could this, for instance, be one of these operations where the Kurds are used to draw out some of the IRGC people, and then they have
let me explain to you. Okay?
Sure.
I studied these groups. I was part of the highest level secret think tank in the Iranian opposition, which, I can't get into even a great amount of detail. We had a think tank that was the brain of an umbrella organization that unified basically all Iranian nationalists across the spectrum, from the most hardcore monarchists to the most hardcore Republicans, which, by the way, that alliance doesn't exist anymore. Okay. After I left that think tank, shortly thereafter, the whole thing disintegrated. And these groups now hate each other. We're talking about the supporters of Mohammad Mossadegh, people who want an Iranian republic, and monarchists of various types, from the more liberal democratic constitutional monarchist types to the more nationalistic pan-Iranist, hardcore monarchist type. We had unified all these people, and I was part of a think tank that was at the center of that, at a high level secret think tank, and we studied these things. We've studied the Kurds extensively. We understand the various groups and the scenarios, and I can guarantee you that if the Kurds, it's okay. So suppose the plan is this, that Israel and America, Mossad and CIA, want these Kurds to go temporarily hold some territory in Western Iran, draw out the Sepah, the IRGC, so that then some uprising can take place in the major cities of Iran, there are a number of problems here. Number one, the Kurds will not give up the land. By the Kurds, I don't mean the majority of poor Kurds living in Iran. I mean the armed, communist, leftist, terrorist separatists who have the weapons, and the corrupt political leaders who are all co-opted by foreign interests. They will not give up that territory, especially because the Kurds have been betrayed so many times. Foreign powers, especially the United States, keeps agitating Kurds to have this uprising or engage in that military operation all the way back. Remember, during 1991, during the first war with Saddam, they told Bush told the Kurds to engage in an uprising, and then backed out on them, and they were slaughtered. Okay, and this keeps happening to them. It happened to them with ISIS in Syria. It keeps happening to them. So the Kurds are not going to have that happen to them again. Either they've been given firm assurances that they're going to get to hold this territory and have an actual autonomous Kurdistan from out of Iran, or they're going to take it themselves or try to, because they've already sacrificed enough and been betrayed, enough times.
Or they don't do it, unless you think that that's off the table.
And we'll know like by Monday or Tuesday. Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, I literally am getting reports that like they're starting, like the troop movements are taking place. All right. There's like caravans going to the Iranian border in Iraqi Kurdistan. Of course, the Iraqi Kurdistan administration is denying the whole thing, because the minute they admit it, they're going to come under missile strikes from the Islamic Republic. The other reason that this plan is a disaster is because you don't draw the IRGC to defend a piece of Iranian territory expecting that Iranians are going to rise up in the cities against the Islamic Republic. The way to make sure Iranians will not rise up against the Islamic Republic is to threaten the territorial integrity of Iran. So that if Reza Pahlavi comes out, we've been expecting for many weeks, Reza Pahlavi's been saying in all these formal speeches that he's giving, by the way, one of the clearest indications that this is the plan that they've set in motion, namely, Balkanization of Iran, is that Reza Pahlavi came out 2-3 days ago and made this formal speech against secessionism and called on all the people in Western Iran to remain faithful to Iran and to their place as part of Iran's history and civilization. And that means that he's gotten the memo and he's not happy. Okay? So we've been expecting for many weeks that, and Reza Pahlavi's clearly stated that at some time, at a certain juncture, he will come out and ask for people to take to the streets again. He will give a speech, a Fatah Khan, a basically request for them to carry out mass demonstrations by the millions and take the streets of Iran, right? If the territorial integrity of Iran is threatened, if Iranians see the Kurdish bullshit secessionist flag go up in Sanandaj, and Reza Pahlavi calls on people to come protest in the streets, they won't come. They won't come. Because Iranians are extremely nationalistic, particularly this revolution of the Lion and Sun is extremely nationalistic, and Iran has just simply lost too much territory over too many years. 300 years ago, forget the Achaemenids and the Parthians and Sassanids. Sure. Just 300 years ago. I know for Americans that seems like a long time. For Iran, it's not. All right? 300 years ago, around about the time the United States was, 250 years ago, when the United States was being founded, let's put it that way, 1776, Iran was twice the size it is today. Twice the size it is today. In just the last 150 years, Iran has lost 1/3 of its territory, mostly to Russia and also to British colonial machinations in the Caucasus, in Central Asia, in what became Afghanistan, another bullshit country. So Iran is not willing to lose another inch, not another inch. And the Zagros Mountains in particular are very important to Iran for a number of reasons. So, no. Okay? It's a disaster. This is the last thing you should do. If your end goal is to get Iranians in the center of Iran, in Iran's main cities, to rise up against the regime.
Now, you mentioned what if. when it comes to the mindset of some of these Jewish people in Israel, like Netanyahu or whoever else is in charge. Well, then I would also ask the question, what if when it comes to the Muslims, when it comes to these oil-rich sheiks, when it comes to this global South, Nick Fuentes, Andrew Tate type influence that's going on in the West as a whole? I mean, if you're making these calculations when you've convened the council of these, learned elders of Zion, then surely you're thinking about that and not just thinking about, well, a nationalistic Iran may be a little bit, too unpredictable. Surely what I just mentioned right now with Islam and all that stuff is a way bigger existential threat to the Jews and Israel.
Okay, here's what I'm being told. That Israel, do you know that 12 countries in the Middle East have been evacuated of Americans at this point? Of course, Iran was evacuated by all foreign governments. All foreign governments told their citizens to leave Iran before this started. But America has now asked for Americans to leave the whole freaking Middle East, up to Egypt and including Egypt. So what I'm being told is that Israel wants the Islamic Republic to hit all these Arab countries and hit them hard. They want the war to last for long enough that Dubai is devastated, Saudi is hit, all these countries that signed the Abraham Accords suffer massive damage from the Islamic Republic on its way out, so that they can all be weakened around Israel. This is what I'm hearing. I don't know if this is true. I don't know if this is true or not. It is happening. Dubai is not going to be what it was after this war, because, Dubai's success depended on the sense of security that it projected for investment and for foreigners to come live there. And now freaking hotels are going up in flames. The Burj Khalifa almost went down. An Iranian drone skimmed the side of the building. Okay? So if Israel wants to weaken, and Qatar, by the way, Qatar is coming under massive attack from the Islamic Republic. So, the Israelis may be thinking, kill two birds with one stone. And I hope that's not the case.
It seems really, really stupid to me. It seems like something where they wouldn't really be considering the fallout of a Middle East where, like Iran's going to be able to shoot rockets into these countries, but later on, the people are still going to be around, and not only are they going to be around, but these sheiks.
I was told. I refuse to believe this, frankly. I literally have refused to believe this consistently. But what I was told is Israelis have no capacity for long-term planning. This is what I was told: is that they're basically, they have a gangster way of operating, where they are ruthless, they're very efficient. They're tactically very smart, but as part of a dynamic, evolving situation, and they have no long-term strategizing, none. In other words, like, they're the diametric opposite of the Chinese. Chinese think in terms of like 50-year plans. They're like, they're the great enemy, okay? But you got to give your enemy, understand your enemy. They think in very long-term plans, the Chinese, and they're very patient. And so I've been told that Israelis are the opposite, and they've got no capacity for basically unfolding a longer-term vision.
I don't know. I hope that's definitely not the case. When I look, for example, at the rallies that have recently been going on with the Iranians and with the Israelis, like with the Jews, standing, arm to arm, if you were to poll these people, I really doubt that they would prefer the kind of Middle East where Iran would be severely weakened. And now you have all of these Arabs that are extremely angry at Israel, including the United States.
I tend to agree with you. And that's one of the reasons why I've been so supportive of Israel, is that the ordinary Israelis and, diaspora Jews, American Jews, and whoever you talk to, are generally supportive of a strong Iran as an ally of Israel. And that makes the situation particularly tragic, because those people are going to suffer horribly if the government of Israel betrays the Iranian people. They will suffer. Ordinary Jews the world over will suffer horribly. So I hope that Israel doesn't do this to the Jewish population of the world. I really hope.
I hope so too. And in terms of what you were talking about before with the intelligence guy that you know, where he was talking about these Kurds, and obviously, you know, if this person is somebody who is connected to intel, again, I don't know who this person is, but if what he's saying is
we use the Kurds and then you shoot them.
Yeah, exactly. Like that
Very
is a
high level. Very high level.
that is a very horrible thing to say. But if we are going with that idea purely as one of these Machiavellian schemes, as it were, would that technically work out as far as the Kurds get into Iran, they don't want to leave, and then there is a force of Iranians after the fact that helps drive at least the leftist militant ones out of Iran?
Unfortunately, it won't only be the leftist militant ones. A genocide will take place. And yes, certainly it will happen. Certainly it will happen. If Iranian Kurdistan secedes or becomes part of it becomes autonomous, or it becomes part of some larger autonomous Kurdistan in 2026 or 2027, 100% I guarantee you that by 2035, that place will be decimated. It will be part of Iranian territory again. More of Kurdistan may be part of Iranian territory than just that. And those poor people will be decimated. 100%, I guarantee you. So the people who are designing this, they don't understand the Iranian people. They don't understand Iran's history. They don't understand the Iranian mentality. Yeah. So, an autonomous Kurdistan, it could last in Iran, maybe like the 5 years that it also lasted in Syria while Bashar Assad was, beleaguered and assaulted from every direction, and the Kurds had relative autonomy in Syria. But it will not last as a nation. No fucking way. And moreover, it would be the worst thing the Kurds could possibly do to themselves, because actually, if we have a strong, cohesive, nationalist Iran, we would support the Kurds to become independent in Iraq and Syria and Turkey. 100%. I have no problem with an independent nation of Kurdistan outside the borders of Iran. Okay? No problem. It'll be like it will have a defense agreement and various, maybe a Schengen visa situation. Who knows? We would have an interesting arrangement with them, both economically and militarily, and I'm sure Israel could as well. But
do you not think? Sorry to cut you off, but do you not think that Turkey would then go after Iran?
We're going to go to war with Turkey anyway. A war between Iran and Turkey, but this is another factor, by the way. This is important. It's a good thing you brought this up. A war between Iran and Turkey is inevitable, and a war between Israel and Turkey is inevitable. Because this motherfucker, Erdogan, is a caliph. He wants to build a new caliphate. This guy is 100% committed to a neo-Ottoman caliphate.
So weird. What's this Georgian guy all of a sudden into becoming a caliph?
Huh? He's
from Georgia originally, Erdogan.
He must have been the stupidest Turk from Georgia. I don't know.
It's very strange. It's very weird.
But you know what? Actually, no. It makes a lot of sense, Lev, when you think about it.
Really?
Yes, because people who are from a diaspora of a country that they imagine had some greatness at some time, and they're not like from inside that country, but they're near to the country, they want the country to expand to include them. Case in point, Adolf Hitler. Hitler was from Austria. Okay. And from the time he was an Austrian painter, he wanted Germany to include Austria. Okay. So it's that kind of, and Joseph Stalin was from Georgia too. He wasn't from Russia. He was a Georgian. So it's interesting, that kind of psychological dynamic. In any case, he's committed to a neo-Ottoman project, and that's an existential threat to both Iran and Israel. And just the way that Turkey wants to become the leader of the Islamic world and basically the standard bearer of jihad, albeit in a much more gentlemanly manner than ISIS or the Taliban or whatever. But, he has literally threatened the German government that if they don't go along with his policies, Erdogan has. I mean, this is why Turkey is still in NATO, which is fucking preposterous that Turkey should still be a part of NATO. But the reason is because Erdogan keeps threatening Germany, which is a major NATO component, that if you kick us out of NATO, I'm going to mobilize the millions of Turks in Germany against the German government. Okay? So he's already got a fucking fifth column in Germany. So this guy wants to be the standard bearer of jihad. Well, Iran is going to be the most vehemently anti-Islamic country on the face of the earth. It already is. They burned 250 mosques down during this revolution. Okay? The Iranian people, the latest polls that we have, it's very hard to get this data out of Iran, but the latest polls we have show that only 30% of Iranians still consider themselves Muslim. Majority of the country has left Islam. And mostly for some kind of a vaguely defined neo-Zoroastrian, Mithraic spirituality that's vehemently anti-Islamic. Okay? So Iran and Turkey are on a collision course. Israel is also on a collision course with Turkey. And you can see that. And by the way, Naftali Bennett gave a speech not that long ago, maybe, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, something like that. I reposted it on X, where Naftali Bennett, former prime minister of Israel, came out and said that the next Islamic Republic of Iran is Turkey. Our next enemy, like what the Islamic Republic was, is Turkey. And so they know that, Erdogan is committed to kind of genocidal anti-Semitism and wants to basically turn Israel into Palestine. So they're on a collision course. So point being, if these fucking strategists had any proper understanding of history and the actual cultural potentialities of the region, they would know that the best way to go about carving up Turkey, which frankly I'm perfectly committed to doing.
I like the pun, by the way, carving up Turkey.
Carve up the Turkey is to form an Iranian-Israeli alliance and build Kurdistan, but outside the borders of Iran, in Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And that Kurdistan will be an ally of both Iran. I mean, it's literally a genetic, ethnic, cultural brother of Iran, okay? It will be an ally of Iran and an ally of Israel. And that would be a great triangle to form in the region between Iran, Kurdistan, and Israel, okay? But you try to take a piece out of Iran and call it Kurdistan as a nation, it's all going to go south very fast.
Well, I mean, your vision is something that I think everybody would be able to give thanks to, as opposed to the kind of vision that may come into being. But if we were to take the point of view of, again, being like super Machiavellian about it, Jason, pretend that you're not in any way associated with Iran. You take a look at Iran and Kurdistan, where Kurdistan has a part of Iran inside of it, and then you take a look at Turkey. In terms of a geopolitical future here, one thing that some people were talking about with me was, well, what if Iran becomes this mighty power, albeit without that particular part of it? And 100%, I understand what you were talking about before. Not one more mile. I completely understand that. But if we were assuming that, sure.
Number one, two of the most important archaeological sites in Iran are in Kurdistan. The Behestun or Bisutun inscription, which ironically is a carving of Darius the Great putting down the leaders of a secessionist attempt in the Achaemenid period. Huge relief carved on the side of a mountain. It used to be called Bagastana, the place of the gods, and it was shortened to Behestun later on. So UNESCO World Heritage Site, where Darius has all these inscriptions carved around this main relief image of himself basically chaining and putting down all the secessionist leaders. And the other is Taghabustan, which is a Sassanid site where you have one of the most important depictions of Mithra, archaeological images of Mithra in all of Iran, presiding over the coronation of Ardashir II, a Sassanid emperor. And you have Anahita and various Zoroastrian angelology symbolism. It's again a rock-hewn site, huge, on the side of a lake. These are like absolutely non-negotiable, integral elements of Iran's cultural history, which will be physically threatened if Kurds take that area, the way that the Bamiyan Buddhas were ultimately destroyed in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
So number one, we cannot allow it to happen for that reason. Number two, and by the way, I said this on X, and some Iranians who somehow bizarrely don't understand their own geography were telling me, Taghabustan is not in Kurdistan. No. It's not in Kurdistan province, but it's in the Kurdish region of Iran. These people want to take 4 different provinces of Iran where there's a Kurdish majority. Anyway, so we cannot allow that to happen, number one. Number two, the attempt at Kurdish secessionism will, in a domino effect, lead to the secession of other parts of Iran. Mm. The second one will be the Azeris, and it may happen simultaneously. You can see already the president of Azerbaijan has sent his military to the border to prepare to invade Iranian Azerbaijan.
Oh, wait, why did the IRGC start firing rockets into Azerbaijan?
To tell you the truth, I think it's a false flag. There were drones, and they hit the airport, and I think it's a false flag. Because, unfortunately, the Islamic Republic isn't completely stupid. And this makes no sense at all. It makes no sense at all for them to have done that. And those drones were fired from a position very narrowly into the Iranian side of the border. So I think it was a special operation where some commandos, I don't know whether they were Azeris from the other side or whether they were Israelis, but somebody carried out a false flag over there, and in order to justify an Azeri invasion of northwestern Iran. So it will be a domino effect. And the next one you're going to see after the Azeris are the Baluch. The Baluch in southeastern Iran on the coast of the Gulf of Oman. As you come up to the Strait of Hormuz that goes into the Persian Gulf, there's the Gulf of Oman, where Oman is on one side. The other side, and that incredibly important waterway, right, where so much oil and resources, food resources, passes back and forth. There's a huge Iranian port called Chah Bahar, which is both an important mercantile port and also a huge military base, Iranian naval base. Chah Bahar was built by the Shah. And that's in Baluchistan province, where you have this group of, again, ethnic Iranians, the Baluch, half of whom are inside Pakistan's contemporary borders, are a group of ethnic Iranian people who speak an Iranian language. And these, by the way, the Baluchi language is the closest. Baluch and Pashto, which is southern Afghanistan, are the two closest contemporary Iranian languages to the Avestan language in which the Gathas of Zarathustra were composed. They're closer than Persian is. So anyway, the Baluch are going to be the next ones, and they're fucking Salafists. Their separatists are Salafist Sunni Muslim lunatics, like Daesh, Taliban style people, and constantly carrying out terrorist attacks in Zahedan and certain, Islamic Republic has lost a lot of security forces over there. And so if they come to power, they're going to establish some Taliban-style shit over there. And one of the things that particularly concerns me in that regard is that India had some kind of strategic agreement with the Islamic Republic involving the management of the Chah Bahar port. And guess what happened right before the war started? Narendra Modi went to Israel and had a very chummy meeting with Bibi. Very, very chummy. You see the pictures of the hugging.
Yeah.
Okay. I really have to wonder if the Israelis made an agreement with India saying, you know what, don't worry, you're not going to lose. In fact, you're going to get more influence in the Chah Bahar port because we're going to turn this into Baluchistan. And you're going to be able to have a footing on the other side of Pakistan for eventually causing the secession of the Pakistani side of Baluchistan in a future India-Pakistan war. which would tremendously increase the naval and mercantile shipping power of India to control that port, and also the ones on the Pakistani side of Baluchistan. So, point being, Lev, it will be a domino situation. First, it'll be Kurdistan, then it'll be the Azeris, then it'll be Baluchistan, and, one of the worst of all is the Ahwazi Arabs, the Arabs in the Khuzestan province of Iran, where 90% of Iran's, well, let's say at least 80% of Iran's oil resources are located. And already these Arab terrorists are putting out videos saying, we're ready. We're ready. When the Kurds rise, they've already put out videos saying, when the Kurds rise up, we're going to rise up and we're ready. And, we're going to have our own on the Arabian Gulf. Yeah.
Okay. Why would the Israelis want this bullshit? I mean, I know that, I'm not in the
divide and conquer. Divide and conquer.
For how long? It's not going to last.
No long-term plan. No long-term plan. This is what I've been told. Again, I refuse to believe this. I consistently refuse to believe this. But Lev, we're going to find out in very short order.
Now, before we get to more of the, well, yeah, exactly. Well, before we get to the Nordics that I also want to talk about in brief before the super chats, I have one more question for you regarding this, which has to do with the Pahlavi solution. Yeah. When we're talking about, I wouldn't even say an alternative plan, because again, things are still in motion right now. But one of the concerns that people have had regarding Pahlavi, when they see these Kurds that are so well armed, they've been fighting all this time, and Pahlavi, he's not in Iran, and like, what are the people going to do? What are you going to like smuggle weapons to the Iranian people who have never fired any of these weapons before? So you see like how much weight is being put right now on the situation. What would be the strategy to go for if you were speaking right now to the intelligence?
Okay.
Yeah.
And I laid this out days before the war. Iran has a, what do you call it? A military where, a non-volunteer military with mandatory service. So all Iranians between a certain age range have to carry out military service, okay? Conscript military. So this means the Iranian military, now I'm not talking about the IRGC. I'm talking about the Artesh, the Army and Navy and Air Force. Navy, unfortunately, is currently being decimated. But the various branches of the Iranian national military. It's a conscript force consisting of ordinary Iranians. It may be that the majors and the generals of the military, and not it may be, it's clearly the case, that the upper level officers in the various branches of the military are beholden to this regime. Because if that weren't the case, they would have already had a coup. Although it's worth noting that I think shortly before the war started, there was a high-level IRGC guy who came out and admitted that during the Lion and Sun revolution, as people were being massacred, they dealt with massive attempted defections. They were calling people, saying, we know what you're about to do. Don't do this. You have a family. Think about what's going to happen to your family. In other cases, they actually they didn't just call people on the phone. They brought them in and they interrogated them and convinced them not to defect. Okay. Large number of people that they had to work on.
Yeah.
So it means that there was dissension, and this was in high-ranking people. Okay. Now, be that as it may, let's assume the majors and the generals are beholden to this regime. Still, from the colonel and below level, it's a conscript military that consists of ordinary Iranians. What they've been consistently saying is that they're terrified of the IRGC, which has superior weaponry and is ruthless and rabidly ideological. So you have to decimate the IRGC, and then there will be a military coup. And these people are trained to use weapons. They're the Iranian military. We're talking about a couple 100,000 people. At least 150,000 who know how to use weapons, have access to weapons depots, and will come out and secure the streets of Iran in order to protect millions of Iranians who are expressing their will for Reza Pahlavi to lead a transition to parliamentary democracy. Okay, a transitional government that leads to a national referendum, which within 6 months, a year, 2 years at most, will determine by popular vote the specific form that Iran's government takes and what kind of constitution is going to be drafted. All right, so that's the answer, is that the conscript military would defect to the side of the people and open up the armories and use weapons themselves. You don't have to necessarily give weapons to untrained people. These soldiers will use weapons to defend Iranians once the IRGC is decimated, and they don't have to worry about the kind of reprisals that we saw, for example, in Turkey. Remember during Obama, when the Turkish, Kemalist, the Kemalist secularist Turkish military revolted against Erdogan and actually drove him out of Turkey. He was on his way in a plane to Germany.
Yeah.
And
wasn't that also the Gulenists?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a combination of Kemalists and Gulenists together. In any case, they were slaughtered, the military that revolted. So they don't want this to happen to them. And it's better if it doesn't happen to them because we need them to protect the borders of Iran. So look, that's the solution. That's Reza Pahlavi's military. It's the military of the Iranian people. The key would have been to decimate the IRGC across the entire country, not galvanize them to go put down a secessionist attempt.
Now, there are still bombs being dropped in Tehran, so that part of the operation is still ongoing, from what I'm understanding.
Well, remember, Lev, that again, this fucking, Rubio, Hegseth have all made it clear that their goal is not regime change. They're going after the nuclear sites. They're going after the missile sites. They're going after decimating Iran's military power and its capacity to back proxies. The missile sites alone are massive targets, underground, inside mountains. Okay, they're called missile cities that have been. Iran is 70% mountains. Okay, these vast underground facilities full of missiles and with tunnels that can carry missiles out onto launchers. These are huge target footprints across the country that need to be hit. So yeah, that's going to take a long time. And that's the main objective of the United States, clearly stated. And they anticipated initially going into it that it would take a month or more. Now I'm hearing crazy things about how long it's going to take, which make me even more concerned. Because there's no reason why a regime change operation should take that long, unless there are other plans for Iran.
When it comes to the mentality of some of these Trump administration people, maybe like Hegseth, who has the Christian tattoos on him, or Anna Paulina Luna, or any of these people, there was also talk about Christianity and end times prophecy and all of that. And also we have the end times prophecy of the Shiites as well, with the return of the Mahdi. So what exactly, to tie this into, the Nordic question here, what exactly do you see happening with these end times prophecies, and any predictions there as far as whether that's going to create an opening, much like the, hopefully not, but much like the Kurds may be using this opening right now to go into Iran, the various powers and principalities may use the opening of this religious superstition and end times prophecies to come in.
One of the most disturbing things that I saw during the course of this war, which again, what we're day 6 or so of, only 1 weekend. Yeah, just about one weekend. Is the insane religious evangelical discourse justifying this as a crusade, coming from out of even Uncle Lindsey Graham, as the Iranians like to call him, dear Uncle Lindsey, right? Who's been a great advocate for Reza Pahlavi, is himself a religious lunatic. Sorry, but I'll tell it like it is. He's a religious lunatic.
Isn't he gay too, though?
Yeah. It only increases the neurosis. Okay? He thinks he's going to do something good for God in the Middle East so that maybe he'll be forgiven. Never mind. Let me just stop myself. No, Uncle Lindsay, thank you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for supporting Reza Pahlavi. Look, the fact of the matter, and by the way, this is another thing that the fucking Israelis should get through their heads. That the only demographic that still supports them in America are a bunch of evangelical religious lunatics. This is who you want as an ally? Securing the future of the state of Israel? Are you fucking kidding me? You've lost the rest of the American population, left, right, center.
Yeah. And what's the age of most of those people anyway? Aren't they all a bunch of boomers?
They're all rotting. They're rotting already. Okay? They're on formaldehyde. So, look, it's extremely concerning. And I think that there's a deeper agenda here. Insofar as there's a group within the United States we've talked about a lot called the Collins Elite. And they're basically a sort of interagency association of people from the CIA, the Air Force, the Navy, Defense Intelligence, who believe that aliens are demons. They think the UFO phenomenon is demonic, and anything about it that's not demonic must be angels, okay, who are going to come back with Jesus Christ and, save the elect. So these people, the Collins Elite, have been one faction that have kept the UFOs secret for all these decades in the United States, because they believe that if there's full disclosure, that disclosure means the apocalypse, which, interestingly, the word disclosure literally does mean apocalypse. The word apocalypsis means disclosure in Greek, oddly enough. So they think that disclosure will mean that, first of all, the Antichrist rises in the world as part of a great deception involving UFOs, and then Jesus Christ and the angels are going to come back. There's going to be the Battle of Armageddon and so on and so forth. So that's one of the reasons why they've been keeping this secret all these years. And therefore, with the imminence of UFO disclosure, where Donald Trump has now officially directed Hegseth to gather together all the UFO files for a potential Epstein-style disclosure, the Collins Elite is incredibly nervous. And there's a war right now behind the scenes in the Pentagon and the intelligence community, where there have been multiple news stories about this. You can go look them up, where these Collins Elite, they don't name them the Collins Elite, but you can see religiously motivated people in the Pentagon who believe aliens are demons, worried about Trump's disclosure, okay? And a lot of people around Trump, like Anna Paulina Luna, Tim Burchett, and so forth, are already believers in this and have been promulgating this viewpoint on various media platforms. Tucker Carlson himself is one of these, one promulgator of this discourse, who claims that he himself was assaulted by some demon in the middle of the night, right? Anyway, the point is that it's not a coincidence that this is taking place at the same time as the Iran war. It's not a coincidence. Because for reasons that we've gone into at length and in depth in previous shows, which I would direct people to go back and watch, even our last conversation on Iran, that I want to get into it in as much depth and detail here. But for reasons that we've discussed repeatedly, if Iran is allowed to go back to a form of government that expresses its own civilizational ethos, Iran will become the only country on the face of the earth with a will to resist the beings that these evangelical Christian morons believe are angels, who are going to come to put down the deception of the Antichrist and save the elect. These are the beings that Zarathustra, at the foundation of Iranian civilization, referred to as devas, and later they're called in Middle Persian div. Okay? The demons who work for Ahriman, the great deceiver, the principle of constraint, okay? also sometimes referred to simply as Druj, the lie. So Zarathustra is so important, not just as the first philosopher who inspired the entire trajectory of Greek philosophy to arise, but Zarathustra is so important as the singular figure who flipped the religious perspective of mankind. All those beings worshipped by all the ancient pagan cultures, which are the same beings, despite what these Christians and Muslims like to think. These are the same beings that later were translated into angels, the Elohim, or the Malayek in Islam. These are the pagan gods that the majority of human cultures, from the ancient Sumerians to the Mayans to the Chinese worshiping their great ancestors, etc., to the Hindus worshiping the devas, right? I mean, remember the Indians and the Iranians, the Vedic Indians, Vedic people, and the Iranians were originally one people. That's why they call them Indo-Iranian, the Indo-Iranian branch of the Indo-European people. So the Indians also literally call them devas, same word that Zarathustra uses in the Gathas, and the language of the Gathas is very, very close to Sanskrit. It's right at that point where Iranian is being separated from Sanskrit as a separate language. And a great deal of that separation had to do with this revaluation of all values, as Nietzsche would call it, where Zarathustra basically says, you people are worshiping demons. The entities that basically are the army of Jesus Christ, the entities that brought Jesus Christ, that will bring Jesus Christ back, the entities that spoke to Muhammad. They are demons from Zarathustra's perspective. They're great deceivers, manipulators, sadistic oppressors of humanity. That is foundational to the ethos of Iranian civilization. And in Neo-Zoroastrian or Mithraic Iran, would have that as the lens through which it views both UFO disclosure and the potential available to us through achievement of the technological singularity. In other words, we are now 20 years at most away from, on an exponentially accelerating curve, we're 20 years at most away from having godlike power ourselves in terms of genetic engineering, artificial intelligence. The recognition of latent psychic abilities, which is happening contemporaneously with UFO disclosure, because the way these UFOs operate is psionic. It's been now disclosed in numerous conversations. The people in Lockheed, the people in the American deep state know this. So the disclosure of psychic ability will lead to the development of psychotronic technologies that combine human latent psychic abilities with artificial intelligence and nanotechnology. And within very short order, we will have available to us the power and the longevity through genetic engineering of the devas. And the last thing they're going to allow is for that to happen. So there is a concerted global agenda on the part of these devas to manipulate various major world powers, every single world power, every single one, with the exception of Japan. If you consider Japan a world power, there's hope for Japan because of the importance of the Buddhist perspective in their culture. I mean, it's kind of hybrid Shinto Buddhist culture, but read my Iranian Leviathan. Gautama Buddha was also an Iranian. Buddhism is, contrary to what many people think, an Iranian religion, not an Asian religion. And Gautama shares in a lot of deep ways Zarathustra's perspective, although unfortunately, he was inclined on an ethical and political level toward pacifism and quietism, which doesn't lend itself to the kind of rebellion against the devas that he did also recognize were deceptive and manipulative and shouldn't be worshipped, right? But still, because of that, and because of the way in which Mahayana evolved, and especially Zen, again, Bodhidharma was an Iranian as well, there is hope for Japan to be allied with an Iran that resists this global agenda. But Japan can't lead it because Japan still has too much of a collectivistic, paternalistic Asian culture. Japan may follow if Iran leads it. But by and large, the rest of the world, America with its Christians, Europe, America, especially with its evangelicals, Europe with its Catholics, Russia with its Russian Orthodoxy, India for sure, unfortunately, because, you know, geostrategically, Iran and India could have a lot of room for collaboration, but fundamentally, the Hindus, the minute these tall white people drop out of the sky in their saucers, oh no, Ram, okay, they're all going to submit. They're all going to submit.
Yeah.
They even submitted to the SS during World War II. You don't think they're going to submit to Nordic supermen that step out of flying saucers and say, hey, we're the Devas? Yeah, 100% they will. So you can't count on anybody in the world except Iran. I don't support Iran because I have Iranian heritage. I have Iranian heritage because I supported Iran. Okay? I remember the last days of my last life, and Iran was on my mind constantly. If I were a person, and it was during the 1979 revolution, so it wasn't hard for a thinker to be thinking about Iran, but I became fixated on Iran and its significance to the world and its history. If I had no Iranian heritage at all, but had the same philosophical proclivities and the same fascination with history and the same concern for geopolitics as I do, I would still have come to the same conclusion that the only fortress that we have on this fucking planet from out of which to resist the Devas is Iran. And that battle is coming within 20 years. Because again, it's not a coincidence that UFO disclosure is taking place at the same time as we're reaching the technological singularity. You think it's a coincidence? Or suddenly we achieve AI and everybody's talking about how, oh, shit, it's true. The government's been hiding the truth about UFOs. And we're going to roll it out. No. It's all coordinated. It's all coordinated. Because the people behind the UFO phenomenon will not allow humanity, by and large, to achieve technological parity with them in a way that gives us defensive capability. They're colonizers. They're oppressors. They rule us. It's like the caste system. And it's going to overtly become like the caste system again once they come out of the woodwork after massive devastating events are orchestrated and take place on this planet. So Iran is a vital fortress for ensuring the self-determination, freedom and independence, and continued progress of humanity, okay, within a cosmic horizon. The core of Zarathustra's teaching is Sepanto Minu, the chief attribute of Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda, the spirit of titanic wisdom, has as its chief attribute the expansive or progressive mentality at work on a cosmic scale, a cosmic force of progress and innovation and creativity. Okay? So the battle with the Devas on the basis of that Sepanto Minu, on the basis of that Promethean ethos, is the only hope for humanity. If Iran falls, humanity falls. End of story.
Now, Jason, to follow up with something pertaining to that before we get to the super chats, when it comes to someone's ethos, you mentioned that in your past life, you were already incredibly connected to Iran. When it comes to what we do right now in this life, in order to determine what ends up happening to us later on in terms of which ethos we want to be a part of, is there any advice you can give to, I don't know, like, let's say you're right about what's going on with Israel right now, any advice you would give to some of the Jewish people that are listening that want to be a part of what you're talking about and don't want any of this bullshit? And any advice in general to people when it comes to what they can do to make sure that where they end up in their next life is not going to be in a bad place, is going to focus on, you know, whatever ethos is going to be the closest to that spirit of wisdom you were referring to.
Yeah, so I don't want to give specific advice to Jews because that's like ghettoizing a population. I mean, I would give the advice to Jews who I would give it to any creative, enterprising, innovative person with a humanistic, valiant ethos, right? I mean, to the extent that any person who happens to be Jewish has that ethos and wants to cultivate it, I would give the same advice, which is that, and by the way, your question is incredibly relevant. We addressed this last time because my book Thanosis had just come out. Copy of it somewhere. Actually, there's a copy of it laying right here. Yeah, Thanosis, my latest book, which is a comprehensive parapsychological study of the afterlife. Okay,
it's link in description, by the way.
Yeah, Thanosis. There's going to be a lot of death on this planet in the next, very soon, in the next 10 to 20 years. A lot of death on this planet, like we haven't seen in 12,000 years. And so it's very important, for example, like what happens in Iran right now. Okay, it's very important that Iran gets its shit together before that starts, so that Iran can be positioned to guide whatever elements of humanity want to feel the resistance and the struggle for self-determination during and after the convergent catastrophes. And if you want to know in detail what I'm talking about, I have a Substack literally called Convergent Catastrophes. So you can go look into that. But so I would give the same advice to anybody with that ethos. And that's that you should inwardly orient yourself toward those principles that you think are the best maxims by which to guide your life, and study in a deep way, not just in an erudite, dry academic way, but be seduced by the elements of various cultures that you think are most constructive for the development of the human future, because they will guide you subconsciously toward where you're going to be reborn after you die. You're going to gravitate toward what you were fixated on and what your life was structured around, okay, on a subconscious level. So that's the advice that I would give. And, what particular heritage, I don't want to use the word tradition necessarily, what particular heritage, what particular histories, and what particular ethical structuring principles any given individual adopts and adapts in a dynamic way that is self-sustaining and compelling is going to depend on that individual and where they're situated to some extent. Okay, like for example, if you have a person, let's say in South Korea, who's a particularly Promethean-minded individual, maybe studying the more constructive elements of Zen Buddhism and what it is about Japanese culture that has made modern Japan so innovative and so intrepid would be a better choice for you than getting lost in Iranian history and the principles of like Zoroastrianism and Mithraism. And it's more practical for that South Korean person.
And when it comes to, let's say, something like, for example, my situation where I was born in the USSR, in St. Petersburg, Russia, and then we happened to find a way to get to the United States. Is there something in terms of those very strange trajectories where you happen to be born in a certain place but aren't there for a long time, and now you're thrust into New York City, into the middle of where everything is going down right now? Is there something to those kind of trajectories?
I think so. I do think so. I think it's a way where life is telling you, come and matter. You, Lev Polyakov, don't belong in war-torn Ukraine or on the Russian side of the border. Come and matter. I think that that's, in the case of individuals who have something to offer the future, I think that's why they wind up being, I know another person very much like that, who are taken from some part of the world by the happenstances of life or the synchronicities, of their biography, to a place that's at the center of everything. Or they wind up having the ability to move in a very cosmopolitan way between various places that are important nodes in the world system.
Yeah.
But
I mean, look at yourself. Like you were, even though you were born in the United States.
I was born where it matters, in the center.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I've been a New Yorker for a long time, which really,
R.I.P.
To see what's happening to that city, because I have been a New Yorker for a very long time. And it's over. It's over.
Pour some liquor out, huh?
Yeah.
Now we're gonna go to super chats, but the very first super chat that I wanted to talk about is from our good friend King of Biltong, for $40. Anton, my good friend Anton, we are the lowest priced direct-to-consumer Biltong brand in the U.S. Biltong USA does not overcharge for junk. We make real Biltong. Go to biltongusa.com, use code word BTR for 10% off. And Jason, you've had some of this Biltong yourself at some of the BTR.
Buy the Biltong.
And also the New York City shows that we have, which, by the way, Jason, we had a wonderful show last time, and I look forward to you coming to New York one more time, even though, RIP, pour some liquor out for the fallen ones. I hope that you do come back to New York City. And if you guys want to be supporting the show and become $20 plus patrons, you are going to have the opportunity to be there in person, watching the show, asking the questions, meeting the amazing, intelligent guests like yourself, Jason, in person, then going out for an after party. If the weather's nice, it's going to be up on the roof. If it's not so nice, we're going to go out to, I don't know, some local izakaya or a nice bar around the neighborhood. But either way, you are helping build something very important right now through supporting BTR. Because by supporting BTR, all these people from all of these different locations and viewpoints and professions, they get to actually burst their bubble and get to a lot of what you're talking about, Jason. Like, what is the ethos? What is the reason that we're doing what we're doing for? And that's something that I want to highly encourage on this show by bringing all these people together. And as you guys know, we've had people on like Curtis Yarvin and also people from, these think tanks, like a good friend, shout out to Vlad Davidson. And all of these people came from different worlds, didn't have anything in common until they finally realized that there is some ethos to work towards. And that's the project that I'm very passionate about doing, but it cannot be done without your help. So if you become patrons today, like I said before, New York City shows, MP3s of the episodes after they come out, exclusive behind the scenes kind of, I don't know what the word is, inner circle conversations that I am going to have with the patrons as well. So guys, support the show and it will be very much appreciated. And also make sure to smash that like button, smash the subscribe button, click the bell. All of this is incredibly important to helping this channel grow. So with that, we shall continue the super chats over here from D Burdened for $10. Nice looking bird avatar there. What are the 3 most effective narratives promoted by Iran's regime that are currently resonating with Americans?
Number 1, this war is Israel first, not America first. Number 2, this war is Israel first, not America first. Number 3, this war is Israel first, not America first. Okay? That's the only selling point they need, and they're hammering it hard. That Oh, you poor American people, we have no problem with you. When we chant death to America, we mean death to the American government. We don't mean death to the American people. Israel has gotten you into this war. We could have perfectly good relations with you if Israel weren't controlling your foreign policy, etc., which is a crock of shit. Because, you know, when this started, when the national revolution started in Iran in late December, I was writing a book on America. I mentioned this
Yes.
in our last conversation, that I had suspended work on it. Now I've terminated work on it. But in my last Danny Jones show, I said that the next project I want to work on was a book about America, which I had been wanting to write for years. And I alternated between various possible titles for this book. One of them at one point was Novus Ordo Seclorum, New Order of the Ages, on our Great Seal. Another was The Great Satan. I was thinking of calling the book The Great Satan. I had other titles in mind too. Because the core of what made America great, and this is what's so disgusting about these MAGA people, the core of what made America great is positively satanic from any kind of Judeo-Christian perspective, and from an Islamic perspective, When Ayatollah Khomeini said in 1979, America is the great Satan, the wounded serpent, in a very savvy way, referencing the original flag of the United States, the Don't Tread on Me flag.
Mm-hmm.
He knew exactly what the fuck he's talking about, okay? Moby Dick is Satanism, all right? Jack Parsons is Satanism. America's Promethean ethos, its entire popular culture that has to do with science fiction, the great visions of the United Federation of Planets in Star Trek, and the Galactic Rebellion of Star Wars, and the Jedi religion, and the superheroes of the Justice League, especially the mutants and the X-Men. It's all satanic. And it was meant to be from the foundation of this country, okay? Which is why the kind of freedom of religion that we have was worked into the Constitution, because the founders of this country naively believed, with their Enlightenment mentality, that simply creating a secular state and giving people an education free from religious dogmatism would allow them to liberate themselves and become enlightened of their own initiative. Unfortunately, they overestimated humanity, which Lucifer also does in Milton. Okay. So the Islamic Republic of Iran is absolutely right about what the essence of America is. And insofar as they're saying, oh no, we're not against the American people, we're just against the American government, it means they think Americans are stupid cows. Remember what Nietzsche said about Christians? Christians, shopkeepers, and cows. That's what defines the Anglo mentality. That's what Friedrich Nietzsche said. And sadly, it's proven true about the United States, that instead of the brilliant vision that our founders had in this country and the Promethean aspiration that we see across the popular culture of Marvel and DC and Star Trek and Star Wars and the Ghostbusters, we are becoming a retarded Christian nation, a biblical republic, where UFO disclosure is going to be managed by people who literally think that aliens are either angels or demons. So, yeah, that's my answer to that question.
What's interesting also about the situation is that a lot of these numbskull audience, some of whom are in the global south, some of whom are just, not that bright mentally, who are listening to a lot of these, Ian Carroll and Nick Fuentes and Andrew Tate, like all these people, Sneeko, their theory is that the reason why things are so bad is because the Jews turned us into these stupid goys, in their estimation, where they wouldn't really see this reality working out in any other way, that things, unfortunately, naturally over time, they get corrupted. People get lazy. People can't, like I was talking about this example, pardon, even mentioning this guy, but, Chris Chan, where his father worked for General Electric, was in the Korean War, collected jazz records, and then, this weird autistic kid who was like into Sonic the Hedgehog on Pikachu and created Sonichu, like did horrible things, with his mother. Like, this being was the spawn of what was considered to be American abundance and American ingenuity. Yet I think the reason why so many people resonate with this Chris Chan character, why he's like the most documented man on the internet allegedly, is because I think that they see inside of Chris Chan a part of themselves where maybe they're not living up to the expectation of their ancestors. And I don't think that that's something that should necessarily be attributed to any particular people. It's the unfortunate reality that if you don't have pressure on you, you're going to start to get loose. And right now, what we're seeing is, who are the countries with the most pressure? Iran, obviously, the Iranian people. We also have, Israel, as far as the pressure that's constantly been on them with the wars. We have Ukraine, the pressure that's coming from Russia. So I see those people as surviving. And like I said before, I wish that there would be an alliance with all those people who actually have enough pressure on them and don't succumb to that pressure and can grow from that pressure. So that's at least my hope here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
So let's go over here to Lady Ariana. We all know where Lady Ariana. Bibi also keeps talking Haman the Persian instead of the Agagite Amalekite. P.S. Don't be mad at me. So I don't know what this is.
Look, the whole discourse of, I don't want to get into this in too much depth and detail, but if someone really wants to get into the Purim story and its subtleties and what kinds of esoteric motivations may have been behind the crafting of that narrative as part of the foundational historical relationship between the Iranians and the Jews, look at my chapter in Iranian Leviathan called Tekel Tekel Mene Shekel, okay? And which is obviously a play on, the famous Bible verses, okay? Mene Mene Tekel Ufarsin. And look, it's very complicated. This idea that a bunch of Jews yearly celebrate an Iranian executing thousands of his own people in order to prevent the persecution of the Jews by a prime minister who basically was an anti-Semitic lunatic, right? Haman. There are a lot of people who would look at that and say, well, that's fucked up. You were the first Zionist-occupied government. What kind of government executes thousands of its own people to protect the Jews? It's more complicated than that. But how Netanyahu uses the discourse of, the defeat of Haman and the execution of the conspirators against the Jews in a way that makes it appear as if the enemy is Persia and Persians. The same Persia and Persians who saved their ass when Cyrus brought them out of Babylonian captivity and Darius rebuilt their temple for them at the cost to the Persian treasury. Okay. And by the way, also allowed Jerusalem to have fortification walls. During the Persian Empire and the Achaemenid Empire, nobody in the empire was allowed to have fortification walls except Jerusalem. The Jews were given a special dispensation.
Big, beautiful walls. Yeah.
So the way that Netanyahu associates Haman and his conspiracy with Persians, Haman the Persian, is concerning. And it feeds into this theory, which we got into earlier, which I hope will be proven false.
Well, there we go. Let's move on to the next super chat. We have two super chats from the same person here for $10. Admiral Parvana. And by the way, I believe that avatar is from the lady from the Cowboy Bebop movie, which highly recommend you guys check it out. It's a beautiful anime made of, I believe, in 2001. I don't remember her name right now. If anybody in the chat can write it down. I think, is it Electra? Or am I thinking of the Nadia? Anyway, Admiral Parvana says, lots of Japanese X accounts are giving their support for Iranians. This is probably due to their growing Muslim population, many who are Kurds, and they know that real Iranists aren't Muslim or Arabs.
I kind of, the question is a little bit confused insofar as it's not clear to me whether the person means that Japanese are supporting Iranians who are Muslims, who are part of their Muslim population, or whether the person means that Japanese accounts are supporting the Iranian National Revolution.
It's the latter. It seems to be the latter, because he's saying that the Japanese are not seeing real Iranians as being Muslim, meaning that they will.
Yeah, well, I've seen many Japanese, like there's a whole Japanese anime that's being made based on the Iranian National Revolution. It's pretty cool, actually. If you can find it on X, there are lots of clips of it. Oh, from the beginning of the National Revolution, somebody did this, and it's being passed around a lot in Japanese. The language is Japanese of the anime.
Oh, that's I think that's the AI psyop anime. It's called something like that. I think it's made in AI. I don't know if the creators are Japanese though, but it's
no, but it's in Japanese language actually, and they refer to Iran as Persia, and it's being passed around by Japanese people, even if it doesn't originate from a Japanese person. In any case, it doesn't surprise me. And like I said, I think, and I've posted about this repeatedly in X, I think that Japan would be a fantastic future ally of Iran. Fantastic future ally for many reasons. Number one, deep cultural ties that almost nobody knows about. Again, I wrote a whole Substack on this. You can find, I believe it was called Mithra in East Asia. Mithra in East Asia. And it talks about how Zen Buddhism and the samurai ethos come from Iran. And there is a deep Iranian impact on the formative phase of Japanese civilization, which was further amplified by the fact that when the Sassanids fled Iran, they brought basically their royal treasury to China, the last Sassanids who fled Iran. And this royal treasury eventually made its way from China to Japan and became the basis for the Shoso-in treasury of Japan and the canonization of a Japanese aesthetic philosophy. So both the spiritual orientation of Japan, the military ethos of Japan, and also the aesthetic sensibilities of the Japanese are connected to Iranian culture on a deep level, particularly to the Scythian branch of Iranian culture. Bodhidharma was a Scythian. And Daruma, as they call him in Japan. He's all over Japan with the blue eyes, the blue-eyed bar. Yeah. So anyway, there's that deep cultural reason, but then there are very tangible contemporary geopolitical reasons. Japan and Iran share China as an enemy. Tajikistan is going to be part of Iran. This little Tajikistan that has a border with China, that's a part of Iran. They speak Persian. I guarantee you, within a decade of Iran's economy being restarted and Iran being a functional country, the Tajiks will vote democratic, no military conquest. They're going to vote democratically, like the Austrian Anschluss. They will rejoin Iran. It'll be like a non-territorially contiguous province, like, for example, Hawaii or Alaska. It's not territorially contiguous with the 48 lower states. That's going to be Tajikistan, Iran. And Tajikistan's on the border with China. It's going to give us massive strategic depth into China, okay? And we're going to be a great ally with Japan against China. Also against Russia. Russia is a huge enemy of Japan. The Russians and the Japanese fought ferocious wars, which the Japanese were very successful in. And so another front that we're going to fight together is eventually the war against the Russians, which the third ally there is going to be Ukraine. And so I see a great partnership between a strong world power, Iran, with Japan in the east and Ukraine in the west against both China and Russia. And so it's a question of the Israelis whether they want to be part of that.
Yeah, come on, Israel, don't be stupid. What are you doing here? This is a great alliance. This is a great opportunity.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
Look, there's a big problem there in terms of the fucking Russian Jews inside Israel. They are a major Achilles heel for that future materializing.
Well, you were talking, and this is like a whole other conversation, but you were talking about October 7th, how you suspect that some of these Russian Jewish oligarchs whose loyalty is a lot more to Russia were, responsible for easing the security when it comes to what occurred there, because allegedly Russia was very mad at Israel for wanting to supply Ukraine with weaponry. So anyway, we have over here Admiral Parvana, once again, $10. Some believe that the Roman nose, like the one possessed by the late Shinzo Abe, was due to Iranian monarchs mixing with their royals. A neo-Aryan anti-Islam alliance will break the Western discourse.
Yes, 100%. 100%. It's Scythian genes is what it is. It's Scythian genes. And regarding a neo-Aryan anti-Islam alliance, 100%. Now, this is where the Jews have to be very fucking careful, okay? Because Aryan in Iranian context doesn't mean any kind of anti-Semitic, racialist discourse. It stands for a certain civilizational ethos. And Israel can be a part of that. But one of the reasons why the Israelis keep promoting, and also Jewish commentators and Jews in the diaspora who are in think tanks keep promoting Persia, 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 is because they don't like that Iran means Aryan and that Iranians are the Aryans. They don't like this. It makes them nervous. It doesn't help that Reza Shah asked the world to call Iran by its endonym in 1935 when he was leaning toward Hitler. I get it. Doesn't help. Okay. But also let's remember that his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, saved a lot of Jews from the Holocaust. A lot of Jews took refuge in Iran during World War II. There's that too. So, in terms of the Pahlavi legacy. So, and Mohammad Reza Shah had a great alliance with Israel in the 1960s and 70s. Great alliance, super high level intelligence and military relationship, to the point where I happen to know they were working on nuclear weapons together. Okay, in the mid to late 1970s. Anyway, the Jews really need to be careful here because you don't want to be excluded from this party. You really don't. Because if the discourse takes shape in a way where it's about an Aryan, neo-Aryan, those Azov people in Ukraine? Okay, look, Israel would be well advised to get in on this party. They would be very welcome, very, very welcome. But
speaking of which, by the way, they do have Jewish people, as our good friend Vlad Davidson already confirmed, who are part of the Azov battalion already. Like any of this bad blood, I don't think it's there.
I will tell you this right now. If they try to carve a piece out of Iran, there will be no Jews left in the Azov brigade or anywhere, frankly, in Ukraine. A stipulation for an Iranian-Ukrainian alliance will be the expulsion of Jews from Ukraine, from any involvement in Ukraine, any involvement at all. For Iran to ally with Ukraine, one of the minimum stipulations is going to be no Jews. You work with Jews, you don't work with us. That's going to be a consequence of carving a piece out of Iran. So may the Israelis and the Jewish diaspora and Jewish power brokers outside of Israel be forewarned. Don't do this. There's a tremendous opportunity awaiting you. It can be an incredibly constructive, high-level security, military intelligence relationship. By the way, all these countries, of course, Israel has nuclear weapons. Israel has about, depending on varying estimates, 200 to 300 nuclear warheads, depending on how many of them are functional and operational rather than corroded. Okay. Those 200 warheads are not going to save you. from the wrath of the entire world. You're going to need a big brother. You're going to need an alliance. You're going to need a global network. But one of the things that Iran and Israel and Ukraine, the largest nuclear power in the world after Russia in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine had the largest number of warheads after Russia. And Japan has a secret nuclear weapons program. So one of the things that these countries can all collaborate in, which helps even the balance of power, because we're David versus Goliath. We're going to be going up against China, going up against Russia. We're the David versus the Goliath. But one of the things that can level the playing field is that all these countries can collaborate in a massive nuclear weapons development together. Okay? And I'm 100% for that.
And by the way,
that requires trust. That requires trust.
Yes, it does. And by the way, speaking of Ukraine, if you recall George Bush's Chicken Kiev speech back in the day, where, and again, you know, he could have been kayfabing it, like we said before, he could have other intentions, but the gist of that speech had to do with him being deathly afraid of the partitioning of the USSR. And in terms of what would happen when there would be a partition, you know, and once again, I hope this will never happen, but, you know, the partition of Iran, I think that Israel should think about that as well. Like, what exactly that's going to create in the world? Is that necessarily a kind of stable relationship that they would be able to have when it comes to, again, all of these Nick Fuentes, Nico watchers that are, you know, right now they're young, but they're not going to be young for forever. You know, they're going to be the next generation. So you want to deal with that? Be my guest. But anyway, we have a super sticker over here from Anon2345, $10. Thank you so much. Next one over here from LVX Lotus, $20. Is there one fundamental truth that serves as the cornerstone of your philosophy? And by the way, guys, no more super chats after this because we have a few more here to be read, but we can't be here all day. But I really appreciate everybody supporting the show. Once again, make sure to smash that like button and smash that subscribe button. Patreon.com/breaktherules, of course. Anyway, there's the super chat.
So I have an incredibly complex philosophical system, right? Which includes an ontology, an epistemology, ethics, the political outgrowths of that, the political philosophy that ethics leads to, and that has metaphysical and epistemological foundations, and also an aesthetics, which I've expressed also in the form of fiction. I have an entire philosophical system that very few thinkers who are still alive in the world today have done that. And by my criteria, which I think are legitimate and I've argued for, those are the marks of an actual philosopher versus a philosophy professor or some kind of pontificator who only writes in metaphysics or epistemology or only does political theory or whatever. That having been said, yeah, absolutely. You could look at this entire complex superstructure or deep structure of my philosophical thought, and you can identify one axial point. And it goes back to Zarathustra. Namely, that we have freedom, and we have it for the sake of creativity. We're free, we can choose. And the reason we can choose and we're free is so we can create. And that's right at the heart of the Gathas of Zarathustra and the foundational philosophy of Iranian civilization.
Well said. Next we have over here from Simurg the Persian 7220. Dr. Jorjani, how come you never talk about other Yazatas of Zoroastrianism other than Mitra and Ormazd? I think currently more than anyone, Iranians need Verethgarna or Bahram. He will give us victory.
Verethragna, yeah, Verethragna in the Old Iranian and Bahram in Middle Persian. I do. Read Iranian Leviathan. Read Iranian Leviathan. I talk about Bahram, which is Mars, and I talk about Anahita, a lot. And they're very important to me. In fact, when I was in Iran, I had the good fortune of being able to make a pilgrimage. There's a dog barking right now, which is very appropriate. You know, the Iranians held dogs to be sacred. You know that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Muslims hate dogs. They hate dogs. You can see what Mamdani is doing to the poor dogs in New York City right now. Muslims hate dogs, and they're considered sacred in ancient Iranian culture because they were believed to be capable of seeing the devas, even when the devas would assume a cloak of invisibility. And they were considered the guardians of humans vis-a-vis the devas. And so there are sculptures of dogs in ancient Iranian civilization, and they're sacred animals. The punishment in the Achaemenid Empire for mistreating a dog was equivalent to child murder. Okay. So anyway, look at Iranian Leviathan. I talk about Bahram and Anahita. And when I was in Iran, I had the good fortune of being able to make a pilgrimage to the temple of Anahita, where the founder of the Sassanid dynasty, Ardashir Babakan, was coronated. So, yeah, check out my actual writings on Iran.
Now, this one over here, I'm not going to put on screen because I don't like his avatar, but I'm still going to say it over here. So Charles Manson, 8351, for a combination of $15, because at first he sent a $5 one. Jason, can you please discuss your conversation with Jeffrey Epstein you mentioned last time, but you didn't say what you discussed with him?
By the way, going back, I'll answer in a second, but going back to the much more interesting question from the Seymour. I also write a lot about Zorvan. Zorvan is very important, and the relationship between Zorvan is like Kronos or Saturn, the Lord of Time, and the relationship between Mithra and Zorvan, and between Zorvan and Ormazd and Ahriman. So, you know, Zorvan is another important element of my understanding of ancient Iranian theosophy. I didn't have a conversation with Jeffrey Epstein. It literally consisted of the guy I looked at him in an accusatory manner for reasons I explained. You want to go back to that show, you can see the reasons why I gave him a hell of a piercing and accusatory look. And he kind of looked to the side, you know, he's like, you know, like when you're trying to avoid somebody's gaze, you know, and then without making eye contact with me, the only thing he said was something like, yeah, well, you know, I used to teach here. As if that was some kind of an excuse for the fact that he was taking this 14-year-old girl who was a friend of mine off with him in his car, and, you know, would have her picked up occasionally by his associates.
By the way, this is the anime pictures that I generated from that particular scene of you at Dalton School back in the day. So next super chat over here, we have Escape from the Loosh Farm. Just want to say thank you, Lev, for letting Jorjani speak and not interrupt him. No, that's not nice. Look, here's the thing. I think that everybody has a different style in speaking. I really enjoy watching Danny Jones's videos. I think he's a really cool guy. So I don't know what to say. I mean, as far as love BTR, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. But again, you know, no disrespect to Danny Jones. I really like the guy. So over here we have, thanks, Lev, for bringing Dr. Jorjani on. Azadek6, $10. Thank you so much. And last super chat over here, Kieram Tukunet, $10.
You know what that means? You know what that means in Persian?
No, what does that mean?
He's my cock in your ass.
Oh, very appropriate final super chat, isn't it? Is it true that Israel is misusing AI to choose targets in Iran, and that it's causing mainly civilian casualties?
No, absolutely not. Is it using AI? I'm sure it's using AI. Is it causing mainly civilian casualties? Absolutely not. That's fucking preposterous. And that story about that they killed a bunch of schoolgirls or something, girls in children in a girls' school. There was an IRGC base next to the school. Now the fucking look at these people. The fucking IRGC are now literally transforming schools that are actively being used by children into their bases. There are high-level government officials that are on the target list are using hospitals to have their meetings in. This is the kind of people you're dealing with. So there was an IRGC base next to that girls' school, and it launched an anti-aircraft and anti-missile rocket, again, an interceptor. And the interceptor failed and fell on the school and blew up and killed those children. That's what happened there, okay? Israel, as far as I'm aware, which is very characteristic of Israel's behavior, at least in Iran, it was true in the 12-day war too, has really tried to minimize civilian casualties in Iran. Even if Israel's plan is to Balkanize Iran out of some delusional vision that they're going to be allies both with Persia, a rump state of Persia, and with Kurdistan, they will not kill Persians because it's going to, even in their own delusional fantasy that they can somehow have a relationship with both parts of Iran, they're not going to kill Persians that they want to sell this narrative to. Okay, it's completely stupid. So no, they're minimizing civilian casualties. Certainly, they don't see Persians the way they see people in Gaza. And even in Gaza, just look at the details of how Hamas constantly used Palestinians as human shields. Okay, the Israelis, if they wanted to carry out a genocide, they can easily carry out a genocide. And in fact, listen, I shouldn't say this, but I'll say it anyway, like many things that I say. If the Israelis were interested in carrying out a genocide, they would definitely want a strong Iran to be allies with, because you know what? We wish ill to a lot of people in the region who have harmed Iran for 1,400 years. Iran is a country that was genocidally massacred and occupied repeatedly by Arabs who brought Islam there, by Turks who reimposed Islam on a thriving Iran that had just come from out of under Arab occupation and was flourishing in terms of scientific and technological development and had undergone a renaissance of the Persian language and literature. And then these fucking Turks come in, voluntarily adopt Islam because it suits their savage mentality, and they reimposed it on Iran during the Seljuk Caliphate. And, Lucifer blessed them. The Order of Assassins fought against this, but ultimately lost because the Mongols came in and decimated them, and they also adopted Islam and imposed it on Iran. And so we have a lot of bad blood with people in the region. And if the Israelis, were interested in a big cleanup operation, big cleanup operation, they would be investing in a strong, cohesive Iran that will be their ally and big brother that they can count on far more reliably than the United States. But we'll find out in very short order whether that's an actionable vision.
Yeah, let's see what happens. Again, I'm hoping for the best over here. And if it does turn out that I'm wrong and these people you're talking with are right, then I don't know. It's something we're going to have to see. People are going to have to, those who have the same ethos that we do, are going to have to then decide what they want the future to look like, who they're going to align with. And a lot of these things, I think, are going to have to be treated very seriously when it comes to, you can't promise people something, you can't make an oath to people where there's a particular vision in mind, and then you stab them in the back. That's
by the way, it wasn't Trump. Bibi said the same thing too. Bibi also said, Iranian people, we are with you. When you go into the streets, know that we are going to be with you. You're not alone.
Yeah, there we go. So I think this is pretty much it right now. Thank you guys so much for watching. Jason, what would you like to leave us off with when it comes to the project that you're going to be working on? I know right now your mind is fully on Iran, but what do the people have to look forward to?
My mind is fully focused on Iran. At the same time, you should expect to see from me before too long a series of works that are more philosophical and more rigorous in terms of epistemology and metaphysics and political philosophy and parapsychology. I intend to publish a series of volumes consisting of essays that are philosophically substantive. And I think that's an important foundation for ultimately more tangible political engagement, which can only take place after we see how this immediate crisis plays out, right? So all of us are right now invested in seeing Reza Pahlavi succeed in leading a transitional government, which, based on his own repeated statements and charters, is based above all on the territorial integrity of Iran. It's principle number one. Principle number one. Look, I was the biggest critic of Reza Pahlavi in the entire Iranian opposition, going back years, because he did not have a very nationalist discourse at all, to say the least. Fortunately, he's now been surrounded by advisors who have finessed his discourse. And I think he's also gotten the memo from the Iranian people that what Iranian people want is nationalism and Iranism and a revival of their culture. And so his number one principle is the territorial integrity of Iran. We'll have to see. Reza Pahlavi came and called people into the streets based on promises from Donald Trump, based on promises from Bibi Netanyahu. And if the end result is the territorial disintegration of Iran, a vacuum is going to open up.
And I want to make sure, by the way, that I do not forget these two super chats. They totally blindsided me over here. One of which is from Sasham, 5019 for 20 Canadian dollars. How could one know about their past life? Also regarding the Karan Vand, could you please explain how they are pro-Muhammad at first, but later they are the most anti-Islamic rebels? Thanks.
Yeah, the latter question is not possible to answer while we're wrapping up the show here. I mean, this is an incredibly complex, controversial thesis, which is at the heart of my book, Iranian Leviathan. Read the book, okay? Iranian Leviathan. Read the book, okay? To understand the motivations of the House of Karen and the House of Karen and other Parthian houses' involvement with the Mazdakite revolution during the Sasanian period, and how the movement of Babak Khorramdin, which became the greatest resistance to the caliphate, as well as also the rebellions around the Caspian, were basically led by the same people who sent Salman Farsi to work on Muhammad's head. I'll leave you with that. Go read the core of Iranian Leviathan. With regards to the first question, as a general protocol, I would recommend that you look into I believe it's called the Division of Personality Studies at the University of Virginia, which used to be led by Dr. Ian Stevenson and what's the guy? Jim Tucker is the guy running it now, Dr. Jim Tucker. A University Division of Personality Studies, University of Virginia, which has done extensive, rigorous scientific study of past life, memory, but then also various past life regression hypnosis protocols that were developed by various psychologists that I go into in this book here. Helen Wambach is one of them, but various serious psychologists have developed past life regression hypnosis protocols, which they then use like historical research and archival data and so forth to be able to corroborate the details of what emerged from out of these hypnosis sessions. So I would look into that. Thanosis is a good bibliography. I have a whole chapter on reincarnation where you can find good bibliographical references to practicing hypnotherapists who, engage in that. But, it can happen spontaneously to people. And that's been the case, in my life. And, what the triggers for that are complicated. They probably involve various types of trauma and acute psychological stresses, and also extreme forms of associational recall, like let's say being in a place that was of tremendous significance to you in your past life during your present life, and having all of a sudden a flood of recollection. And so, that's more haphazard. But yeah, that's what I would say in response.
And the last super chat from Judge Holden 849 for $10. Jason, are you familiar with Mark Brahman and Richard Spencer's Apollonism project? It's like the antithesis of Prometheism. Are you open to having a polite debate over religious symbolism with Spencer?
Of course, I'm familiar with it. Yeah, of course. I worked with Richard, and I haven't had any communication with Richard since I resigned from the Alt-Right Corporation in, 2017, and it was in August of 2017. And he reached out to me a few times, by the way. I didn't answer him, Richard Spencer. Look, the point of this is my general, I don't want to say philosophy because I hate it when people use that word. My general philosophy for such as this is such an abused way of using
my
the
general love of wisdom.
Yeah. My general attitude with regard to debates is this, that you should never enter into a debate with anyone unless both sides are willing to be persuaded by the other side. That the only point of a real debate is like a Socratic conversation of the kind that you find in the Platonic dialogues, where both sides are sincere participants who are willing, with a completely open mind, to come over to the other side if they're sufficiently convinced. And that requires both sides going into the conversation with a profound spiritual humility and a sense of incompleteness and openness to the expansion of understanding. Such a conversation is not possible with these individuals that you mentioned here. Neither Spencer, I knew Richard well, nor Mark Brahman. This is a circus that I'm being invited to. It's a circus for like popcorn. Throw popcorn at the screen, like the so-called political debates that you see on TV. I'm not interested in participating.
Yeah, with that British guy and that poor Iranian lady. What's her name? You know who I'm talking about. She's on there as well, and they have Dave Smith and all these people on there. It's a horror show.
Goldie,
yes. Goldie. Yes, I don't know why she does it, because it just seems very beneath her to be with these. I don't know.
I have no comment, my dear friend, about that. But I will add one more thing in response to this.
Sure.
Okay? So that if they want to pass any message on to the Apollonism people. Another reason why I'm not so keen on the circus that this would be, which would not be a real debate at all, because these people aren't philosophers. I'm a philosopher. If I find another philosopher, an actual philosopher, to sit down with to have a debate, I'm elated to have a debate. Believe me, I would want nothing more in the world than to be able to sit down with another philosopher and have a real debate, meaning a Socratic conversation. I'd be very happy. Believe me, I'm the kind of person people don't, a lot of people have no fucking clue. If you study me deeply, you'll see this. The people who've studied me deeply and who followed me for a long time, they know this about, also my close friends know this about me, that I would be willing to shift my perspective 180 degrees if you give me good reason to, and reason also can have aesthetic factor. Someone can be aesthetically compelled. Beauty is also a path to wisdom. And so I can come over to different, and I have shifted my position many times. Some people call me a flip-flopper because of that. No, I'm a free thinker. I'm not bound to any idea. I have no ideology. I have no dogma. I'm like Socrates.
Mm.
So, yeah, if I found a real philosopher with which to have a debate, with whom to have a debate, I'd be never. But let me end on this note. Let me end on this note. The message they can bring back to these characters, one of whom was my former business partner. Another reason I'm not too keen on this circus is that Apollo will do well. Apollo will do well. You know how I know that? Because I've seen Apollo above the floodwaters in what is now New York City decades from now. I can't tell you exactly how many decades, but decades from now, in what's now New York City, where the water is up to the 30th floor of the Empire State Building. And the new city is built on what is currently the Palisades going up into the Hudson Highlands. There's a new city there. In the northern part of what's currently the Hudson River, which is a much wider expanse in that time because of the flooding, in the northern part, there's a platform, a raised platform. And on that platform are Greek gods and goddesses. And one of them is Apollo. So I know Apollo will do well. I'm not interested in finding out more about how Apollo will do well. I'm interested in making sure that Prometheus survives and thrives in that future. Understand? Because I've seen a future. I won't say I've seen the future. We can change the future. It doesn't have to be that way. Nothing is inevitable. Okay, but I know the future that Apollo has been vouchsafed. I'm worried about Prometheus.
Yeah.
And I will continue to be.
Apollo's going to be fine. The only other thing that he says over here is it doesn't have to be a debate. It could be just a conversation. But, just want to throw that out there. But I think that's pretty much it. Guys, thank you so much for watching. And also, I did not promote the Discord, so I will do so now. Here's the link to the BTR Discord. Go there. I mean, I know the age verification and the Big Brother stuff. It's horrible, Jason, the kind of stuff that's going on right now as far as tracking everybody. But again, I want to build up a community of like-minded, curious, intelligent people out there. And with your support, this will happen regardless of, which direction things are going to go down. I really appreciate everybody being here. Jason, my friend, I really appreciate you so much being here, talking with us about this. And let's keep our fingers crossed and let's get through this whole thing together. And yeah, that's it. Everybody, please support Dr. Jorjani's work, buy his books, and support BTR. Smash the bell, subscribe, click the like button, all of that good stuff. Patreon.com/breaktherules. Become a patron today. I would really appreciate it. And once again, if you become a $20 patron of Break the Rules, you are going to get the opportunity to be physically in the studio in New York City with all of the very intelligent people that are going to be watching it live and then go to an after party.
I'll be back there in the BTR studio on my way to Tehran, hopping through New York on my way to Tehran.
Excellent. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.